Hello, everybody. Welcome for the second time today to Rage and Love, where we passionately debate, explore, and discuss topics about religion, science, history, and current events. I know Joey hasn't been around for the last two episodes, so we are providing some visual evidence that he's still alive,
I'm
that
still
I
here.
have not 86 him. Uh, so, welcome back. What have you been up to?
Just I have a lot of other stuff going on with my other social media content that I work with, and the last show on Friday I wasn't able to make it because I got stuck out on a very active police scene, and today, well, this morning for your show, I couldn't get out of bed because I stayed up very late. But hey,
Yeah.
I'm here now. It's 4 o'clock, so I'm ready to get into some debates.
You took your naps, your morning nap and your afternoon nap, so
Well rested,
you're
well
ready.
rested.
Exactly. So when we talk about morality, we often picture like a courtroom or philosophy books, heated debates about human rights. But what if morality doesn't begin or end with humans? What if the roots of empathy, fairness, and care exist beyond or species, in the forest, in the ocean, in the fields, among any of the animals that share the planet with us. So today we're asking ourselves one of the most fascinating yet uncomfortable questions that are at the crossroads of science and ethics. Do animals experience morality? And whether they do or do not, as humans who claim to care about fairness and compassion and harm reduction as well, should we extend this moral consideration to non human animals? Through things like our choices, our food systems, and how we interact with other living beings. So, even if animals cannot argue their own case for morality, what does our morality demand of us? The we are what we consider the reasoning species, right? So where do we draw these lines of morality? And to help us navigate these questions today, we have brought Scott Dickey and Richard Gilliver. Welcome, guys.
Hey, hey,
Welcome.
hey, thanks for having me on.
Awesome, good to have you both.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
So,
Torquedan contingent.
Right. We're taking
uh,
over the internet.
heck yeah, let's do it. So you guys are both on Talk Hidden, and we have all three of us, except for Joe, being on the nonprofits for the ACA shows. It seems that lately, Scott, you are in high demand. You've been on Talk Hidden, I think, like 4 or 5, maybe 5 times in the last 2 months. So
Really? On
how's
Talk
that?
Heathen? Okay. Well, I,
Yeah, yeah,
I've
you
been
have.
here and there. Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of times. That's Richard. I do I owe you another $20 or something?
You got some under the table deals going on.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun. How long have you been with Talk Hidden, Richard? Because you're the producer now. So.
I'm not entirely sure how long I've been with Torquedan specifically. I think we're probably, what year are we on? 2025. Probably coming up to 3 years as a permanent host. I would think. Producer. I started producing it not long after I started hosting it, from what I recall. But I've been around the ACA for probably 5 years or something. So it wasn't just the fact that I'd kind of bullied my way in and said, right, I'm a host. I demand to be made producer now, and
That's what it
they
takes,
collapsed
right?
at my feet. I was well known, and the hardest thing was becoming a host. It was I was. I'd been a guest host for a few times on Tokiden and Truth Wanted and shows like that. I've been on non-profits for many times, but the call-in shows I'd been on as a guest a couple of times on each of those, and I think I'd been kind of nudging one of the producers to say, I think I'd make a good host. I've got other people in your ears telling you, I will not divulge who they are, but other people in your ears telling me I'd make a good host. And I was basically told, we were just waiting for an opening for you. We're waiting for the right time. And I did a debate with Dean Meadows on I think it was miracle claims, supernatural miracle claims in the Bible or something like that. It's very much a William Lane Craig protege. Talks about the film a lot.
That's too bad.
I had a debate with him, and it was awful. By the way, it was
I can imagine.
it was, and it was simply. I think it was bad, and I did do a review video of it, and I did make a couple of mistakes, and I pointed those out in the review video. The main reason I think it was awful is because we'd agreed on terms before the debate. And then we got into the debate, and all of a sudden he started using completely different definitions for the ones we'd agreed on. And it was for like a big chunk, like an hour of the debate was arguing over definitions, but there was like all the top brass of the ACA for some reason had turned up to watch the debate. And then after that debate, they said, we're going to let you on as a host.
Boom. That was it. That was the magic. So it was God's will.
It was God's will, yeah. Yeah. Or Greg, as he's otherwise known.
Right, yeah, well, use those terms loosely.
Interchangeably.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that clip, I think it was you, Scott, doing it where you start talking to like the heavens, and then Greg's voice comes up, and that was hilarious.
Oh yeah, that was fun. That was fun doing that. I think that was for the
awards,
Christmas, the Christmas thing
So,
for last
yeah.
year.
Yeah, the award show.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
it was the awards right around Christmas time. Yeah. So yeah, that's a really funny one. So we mentioned this before starting the live show, that Joe and I had a show with Chase a couple months ago, and this episode stems from that one. But you know what? At the risk of sounding like fucking Jordan Peterson, I think that we need to bring out the definitions, okay?
All right,
we agree definition, because we're going to talk about morality.
Okay.
And so, would anybody like to start with their definition on how you interpret morality? I think you are both probably more apt at defining it than myself.
Well, I mean, the thing about morality is that I'm certainly no expert, and but it's the kind of thing that everybody kind of can talk about, right? Everybody has their own thoughts on morality. Everyone has their own take on it, and so I think starting out with a definition, I think is an excellent way to go. I think so many people get very like neck deep into a discussion on morality, and then they realize they've been talking past each other for the last hour, 2 hours, or however long it is. For me, I kind of lean towards Sam Harris's take on morality, and I kind of define morality as things that an action is moral if it promotes the well-being of conscious creatures, is the way that he says it, and I like the way that he says it too, because that today we're going to be talking about animals and stuff, and so they all kind of fall under the umbrella of conscious creatures to some extent or another. And so for me, morality is things that promote the well-being of conscious creatures, and then immorality would be the opposite of that, would be things that either cause harm or prohibit well-being and that kind of thing. So that's really my take on it, and I like that take because for the exact reason that Sam Harris in his book Moral Landscape presents it that way, is because it's very objective and it's very cut and dry. You can make a strong argument. If somebody chops off my finger, it's very easy for me to make an argument that they've harmed me. And so it simplifies things greatly, at least in my opinion, in the way that I take on it. So that's really my thoughts on it.
Okay, so I'll add that I know that a lot of people, and I think Richard may agree with this, or I can't remember if it was you or Dan that has mentioned that Sam Harris has a lot of issues and a lot of things that we can disagree with. But
Definitely.
I am
Right.
with you, Scott, that his book, The Moral Landscape, was one of the first that I read.
Hmm.
Going into atheism, and so I really appreciated his take on morality, and
Right.
I still agree with it. So I don't know, maybe
Yeah,
change our language or
I
something.
think that's a point worth
Yeah,
mentioning, AJ. That yeah, I disagree with some of the things that Sam Harris says. I think that his take on things like immigration and so forth, are and torture and that kind of thing. I think there's some gray area at the very least
yeah,
there. But on this particular thing, I like the way that he presented it in that book to that extent. And
yeah.
so
Same here.
yeah, I think we're on the same page there.
Yeah, I've only flicked through the book. I, regarding morality in general, and I know me and Scott have had a bit of a back and forth in the past on about morality via private messenger. So just to say to everyone out there, atheists don't always agree. That's
For
all I'll say
sure.
on that one.
That's the key.
But I think, I mean, the degree I've got is in 3 parts. It's religion, philosophy, and ethics. So I would always refer to kind of morality in an academic sense as ethics. But I think it covers a lot of ground. Sam Harris, I'm probably one of the only atheists in this kind of sphere who hasn't been a big reader of the kind of Four Horsemen. I think the only Dawkins books I've ever read are purely biological ones. I've not read any of his I've not read The God Delusion at all, although my wife has a copy and I've never read it. This Sam Harris I've only ever read in writing essays in religious studies when I've been writing about new atheism, and I wrote an essay about new atheism. It wasn't of my choosing. It was kind of prescribed to write an essay about new atheism. That's the first time I ever read any Sam Harris at all, and it was kind of flicking through. I did try and read the audio book of the Moral Landscape. I'm not going to lie, he read it himself, and I got about 2 chapters in and thought, "Fuck this! I can't do with that droning voice anymore."
Really? You didn't like it? Oh, I find his voice very soothing. And so
It
maybe
was
it's just me.
not for me. Not for
Okay.
me.
We should
All right.
put St. Andrews to read it, then everybody will
Yeah,
listen to it.
Be okay.
absolutely. But yeah, so I'm not overly familiar with Sam Harris's work. I'm not keen on his use outside of kind of morality. I'm not keen on his use of spirituality. The way he
Yeah.
uses the word spirituality, I
Right.
think it's too vague and causes a lot of confusion. Or it
Definitely
can
muddies the
cause a lot
water,
of
I think.
confusion.
Yeah.
But
So let me quickly,
Yeah.
I can say a super quick summary of like a few words. It would be basically that we can use science to understand what can be harmful or not harmful. As Scott said, like if you cause physical harm, then obviously you can tell that this is something that will be um, and not necessarily just physical harm, okay? Because if you're having a surgery and you have to be awake for that surgery and you're still feeling things, that you might feel the harm, but then you also feel the benefit of it. So yeah, basically using scientific understanding to understand what type of harm is actually beneficial or negative, and therefore we can sort of derive whether it's moral or immoral from that understanding. That's just
Right.
like a super basic uh, idea from the book. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that is like a lot of nuance, like a lot of nuance to the morality. That's why I call it the moral landscape, because it's
Right.
like
Right. There
yeah,
can be multiple high points on the moral landscape and so forth.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So, what would be your definition, sort of, Richard, from your understanding of ethics and your studies, like your definition of morality?
I think I tend to agree with the definition Scott gave. I think it's I'd go
It's
with that.
okay to admit that you agree with
Yeah.
Sam Harris on
Yeah.
this then.
No, I do. I think that's fine. I think with any of these things, I hesitate only because with any of these things there is a lot of nuance. And
Yeah.
when we're giving any kind of definition, I think it should be with a caveat. And I think as atheists, that word we're all familiar with this, because there are so many there are different definitions of atheist, and the common usage definition is adequate in most circumstances of having conversations. But we've got to understand that there are usages outside of that. And I think that's the same with anything. I think it's the same with ethics. I think it's okay to give a broad, this is a broad definition. I think as we get onto, which I'm assuming we will during this conversation,
Of
as
course.
we get onto veganism, I have issues with the definition of veganism. So I think that'll come up, that I think it's important to talk about subtleties in definitions.
Okay, yeah, we can get onto the definition of veganism later too. Yeah, for sure. So let's start with the question that Joe had asked Chase. So like I said, we misunderstood the question that Joe was asking, and eventually we realized after the show, Joe and I were talking about ourselves, and we were like, oh, what you tried to ask was this. So Joe, tell me if I understood this, or maybe you can ask the question yourself. But if I got this right, you were asking whether animals experience morality. Was that right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. Um, I mean, they seem to offer compassion towards each other when we see, how animals interact. But do they actually feel? I mean, do they? I think I was trying to ask, do they get that compassion from morality, from having morals, basically towards each other? Am I?
Mm.
Does that make sense or no? Maybe.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it makes sense to me, and certainly from my reading on the subject, they do exhibit, or some animals exhibit morals or ethical behavior. Rats exhibit it, monkeys exhibit it. I can't remember what else it is. And I know there are quite a few species. It's one of those things where I think this is where, I've talked about this kind of the sensory perception bubble of a species before, certainly with AJ. And I think this is one of those things where we've got to be very, very careful not to kind of anthropomorphize animals, because each species has its own sensory bubble,
Mhm.
I think it can be far too easy to say, oh, they're exhibiting morality, they're exhibiting human behavior. And I don't think that's the case. I think they're
Right.
exhibiting their behavior as a species.
Right. Yeah.
And that morality that they exhibit may have a lot of things in common with our moral kind of goals and things. But I think it would be a mistake to kind of say, to lump animals in as having, I think this is one of those nuanced questions. I think it's a brilliant question, Joe. I think it's one of those with nuance, that we can't just say, well, animals do have morality. We can
Yeah.
say some animals have been shown to exhibit a moral behavior,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
that's important. And it's important in many, many ways, not just for ethics, but for consciousness studies and all these things that, I find really, really interesting. So, yeah, I think it's safe to say, for me, I'd confidently say some animals do, display ethical behavior, and it is consciously ethical. It's not just kind of instinct and appearing to be ethical. It is actually them having compassion for other members of their own species, and in some cases, members of other species.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I like that answer.
I wish we had Erica Gibbon here right now. She's amazing on this topic, and I've heard her, I've listened to her talk about this before. And well, she didn't call it morality because I think she was trying to separate that and not anthropomorphize animals as well. So, but she did call it, empathy, cooperation,
Mm.
social behavior, and even altruism. But I did a little bit of research, and I found, based off of what I remember her talking about, and there is some evidence, some scientific evidence, or at least I don't know, maybe we can call it consensus among the experts, that points to some level of morality. And again, you said, there's a lot of nuances, and calling it morality maybe is not the correct term, but it was sort of like the building blocks of morality, I suppose you could say. And obviously not to the same level that humans ponder and express it. But for example, and again, Erica is the one that talk about this, and I sort of double check her work just to see like where else it would lead, because she often talks about apes and chimpanzees and bonobos,
Mhm.
that have been observed to, comforting or like displaying some type of behavior towards other members of their own species when they were distressed, that would indicate that they have some kind of empathy. Um, other primates outside of those also work together to achieve goals for the betterment of their own
Right.
community, or like wherever they are. And those that cheat or like refuse to share or that refuse to take part in this may be excluded from like future cooperation, because they're like, remember that this one wasn't helpful last time, so it's,
Right. Right.
so you're not welcome anymore. So like that makes you wonder, like they are reasoning in a way, they're making decisions in other ways. So, I would think that they are also thinking of right and wrong, but maybe again not at the same level that like we would think about it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think it's worth noting here that we are kind of straying a little bit from our definitions that we were talking about before. I mean,
Yeah.
if we're asking, can animals be moral, and if we've defined morality in terms of causing harm, of course animals can cause harm, and they can do things that are not harmful, they can do things that are helpful. We're kind of allowing this in, and I'm not saying it's wrong. In fact, I would welcome this kind of nuance and perception or perspective on this, but we're kind of allowing us to seep in a little bit the idea of being aware of what you're doing, right? And so we can agree, I think, with very little um, issue or very little difficulty, that animals do harm each other, and they do things that can help each other. And whether or not it's intentional, whether or not it's
Yeah.
instinct, and I think there too, Richard, you were saying, is it instinct or is it compassion? Well, I think that even that separation of, this is instinct over here, this is compassion over here, there's lots of nuance in the middle there too. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
really I think
Black and white. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a straightforward answer. Yeah.
framing the question is this moral or not, I think is framing the question that way kind of enforces that kind of, I don't want to say dichotomy, but that those separate possibilities, and really it's a smear, it's a spectrum across. And so all of, we're dealing with multiple spectra here, and so it can allow for, I mean, I agree that that's part of it. I mean, that would be part of what I think, that if you're conscious of what you're doing and you make conscious decisions, that itself can also cause harm, and that in itself can also be helpful to a society and to individuals and so forth. And so I think it's interesting that even though we started out wanting to say, here's our definition and we're going to have our discussion, and then instantly we break away from that discussion. And I think that's a totally normal human way to approach this. And I think
Yeah.
that itself can, even people like the four of us that kind of want to have a good, solid, hardcore discussion on this, can be drawn astray in their different directions. And that allows a lot of that nuance to either overemphasize the differences or disguise the differences. And so, just watching us having this discussion, I think, is really interesting, because it shows a lot of those difficulties that, if those kind of things can arise between four of us that are relatively like-minded on many things, it's no surprise at all that people that are totally different and viewing things from a totally different perspective, you would expect naturally there's going to be huge differences. And so it's I don't know, I think that shines a really interesting light on this whole discussion.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think this is, as I was saying at the beginning, this is one of the problems of having a kind of I know definitions are useful, we have to have them, but this is the problem with definitions, is that we can kind of get to they can be too stringent sometimes, and I think perhaps the definition we're using here isn't adequate for the question that Joe asked, because it is from a very human perspective. And as I said, when we're talking about, animals having morals themselves, we're not talking about human beings. When we look at that, there's I think there's always going to be I'll call it a bias of that word inside
You said it
animals.
right.
Yeah,
Peoply bias.
Yeah, because we're looking at it from our perspective, our sensory bubble, and of course they, I've talked on this many times, have their own sensory bubbles which are nothing like ours, and I think that's important to bear in mind. I think both AJ and Scott touched on something very important as well, wherein the animals have been observed to be doing what we would call ethical behavior to each other, and sometimes to members of other species as well. They've also behaved, if we're going to take that human perspective, unethically. There are instances where, for example, elephants, there've been elephant young who have suspected to have some kind of impairment, whatever that is, and no details were given in the kind of literature I was reading as to what that was. It was just a suspicion of the biologists observing them. And the male elephants, the leaders of the kind of troop, basically kicked them out, physically beat them and kicked them out because of this. And the mothers were showing compassion, trying to look after them, and the male elephants were just basically saying, no, that is not going to be part of our troop. And in this particular case, the young unfortunately was left to its own devices and was observed to have been attacked by a pack of hyenas, I think it was. But yeah, I think it's important to look at it from both aspects as well, and not just say, well, animals are compassionate, and that, they're brilliant as well, because they do behave the contrary to that as well, to the contrary that we'd like to see them behave.
But hear me out with the elephant story. One could argue that the male elephant was thinking of the overall group benefit, right? Like he was saying, this one has a disability and it's going to slow us down. We're going to be easier targets. If we get rid of the weak link, then the entire group will be more likely to survive. And the mother or the females were thinking, why are you harming this little one? So both of them could be seen as sort of a moral decision, not decision, but a moral aspect to it, but a human moral, like you said, Richard. We are talking about this and defining morality, but we are using it to a non-human animal species. So yeah, it's not fair to use these definitions for both of them. So
maybe
Scott,
today's show should be ways to not human, right?
Ways to not human. I like that.
I love that. I should have changed that title.
Yeah.
No, but what you were saying is I think is very much in line with what Richard was saying. If we impose our values and our priorities and interpret their behavior in that through that lens, then we're going to see it one way. But if we could somehow communicate with the elephants, they might have a totally different perspective on it. And so that stands to reason, I think.
Yeah, and how that specific behavior could be beneficial for them as a whole, group.
Yeah.
Another one that I can think of is there was an example of some monkeys that protested when one of them was receiving a less desirable reward than another one, and the scientists studying them were like, well, they're experiencing fairness and like feelings of fairness and unfairness, but was that actually what they were experiencing? Was it just like something more basic, like just jealousy? So it's like we put our definitions or labels on
Right.
animals, and the truth is that we cannot communicate well enough with them to fully understand them. We can observe them, we can
Yeah.
make assumptions and generalizations, but we can't truly understand them the way that we barely understand their own species.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And it's,
I think
You're being a little generous for saying barely there even too, I think.
yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
very difficult as well to do this. There's a great book. I think it's called An Immense World by Ed Yong. I think it is who wrote it. Who's a science communicator, and it talks about the kind of something I'm very interested in, which is this sensory field of different animal species. And he's very, very careful at the beginning of that book, and I think this is very important and very relevant to what we're talking about. Is he says at the start of that book that what he's not doing, or his aim is not in the book to compare human senses with animal senses. It's not to say, dogs have better senses than we do, so we're not as good. It's not about that. What it's about doing is just looking at these different worlds, these different perspectives that these creatures live in compared to us, and to see that they are completely different. They are their own individual kind of take on the universe, and that is not our take. It's not the way we come from. We have a different sensory bubble that we live in.
Wouldn't that
Yeah,
be cool if we could learn of that from that perspective? I mean, that would be so amazing
yeah,
to
to
right.
just
experience
be
it.
able to talk to a dolphin or be able to talk to a chimpanzee or something. It would be crazy. It would be crazy. It would be world changing is what would happen. I mean,
And
if we could understand that, that would be fantastic.
And I think we can, in a way. And this is, and I don't want to. I said I'd talk about this. It's inevitable I'm going to talk about this because this is my fucking soapbox. But I think we can, but we don't do it enough. Whereas where animal consciousness is concerned, there are plenty of people who study animal consciousness and can, to an extent, understand the perceptions that non-human creatures have. I think the problem we have in consciousness studies, and I will say this time and time again, and I think it is criminal, is that we do not include those biologists in consciousness studies. Time and time again, when you get consciousness kind of forums going off, what you get is you get philosophers and you get psychologists and you get neurologists there, and all very good, conversations are to be had in those fields, but we don't include animal biologists, and I think that is criminal. When we're talking about consciousness, you have to include that perspective.
Right.
I think you have to.
Yeah, it's like looking at it with one eye closed, right? It's like,
Yeah.
intentionally
leaving all that
avoiding
information
looking at
out.
some of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, so
my original question. Well, go ahead.
yeah, go
AJ.
ahead.
No, well, I was
No,
just
you
gonna-
go ahead. 'Cause mine
my
was
original
changing.
question, what made me, come up with that question was when we were talking about veganism, and we were discussing how humans can have compassion towards the killing of an animal and eating it, and you feel that that's wrong. So, but I think I'd question. So we have animals in the wild, that hunt each other and kill each other. Do they feel bad when they kill each other for food? As we say as humans, people that are going vegan feel horrible, because they feel sorry for the life of the animal that they're eating. But these animals are killing each other every day in the wild. Are they feeling sad when they have to kill another animal to eat, to survive?
I think is AJ better positioned to answer that question? I don't know. This is something that comes up in vegan non-vegan discussions.
Yeah, I'm sure it
There's
will come
this
up.
this it's a conversation. It's often leveled at people who eat meat as a naturalistic fallacy, to say that, well, it's okay because it happens in the wild. So I don't know if AJ might be better positioned to respond to that than either me or Scott. I don't know what Scott's position is on it.
The only thing I would add is that just to note that, I mean, that is kind of a anthropocentric. I just wanted to say that because I knew Richard couldn't say it earlier. That is kind of that is kind of an anthropocentric question. We're talking when we say, do they feel bad about having to do it? We're saying, do they feel bad like we do? Right.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's interesting that we talked about all these things that we're concerned about, and then we all just dive right into those exact things. And I think it's really cool to observe ourselves doing that kind of thing. But sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Richard. Go ahead with what you were going to say.
No, I was actually passing. I was passing the ball, but yeah, I think it's a great point,
Yeah.
Scott. And I know you're great at doing this. I know you've done this on the non-profits before and pulled your fellow hosts up who maybe haven't looked as deep into something as they might have done. And I think it's important. I think it's an important tool to check ourselves with and each other with. But yeah, very, very important point, AJ.
Oh, yeah, no, I completely agree with both of you where you're coming from on this one specifically. I don't think that is sort of I'm not saying it's an invalid question, but it's not a good argument for, like, hey, I'm going to do it just because it's done in nature because other animals do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely not something that should be used in that way.
I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but and Joe, please do jump on me if I've got this wrong. I'm not quite sure that was what Joseph was asking. I don't think he was making that argument as such. I was just thinking.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to condone saying that it's okay just because animals do it. I think it was more the question to, but I guess as we discussed prior, we really can't know because, like like Richard said, they're living in a different perspective. I mean, a different bubble that we don't have. We don't have a perspective of that. So I mean, yeah, I like what both of y'all said, and yeah, again, I'm not trying to condone that just because animals kill in nature that it's okay for us to kill as humans. I was just using that as a way to. I mean, I guess it's a valid question for me just to wonder, like, if they're able to kill without any type of regret or remorse. I mean, do they not feel sad when they kill another animal? I mean, we know that they feel emotions because we see animals, well, certain species, do, show that emotion in circumstances. I don't know. I mean, it's just something I've thought about.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question too, and just bringing up the question. Obviously, you weren't saying, "Oh, it's okay for us to do it because they do." And I saw that Chase in the chat mentioned something about the appeal to nature fallacy, and that was a totally legitimate thing to bring up. I mean, we're not saying that, or at least I don't think any of us are saying that it's okay for us to do X because animals do X and that kind of thing. I think but it does bear in mind that. We need to incorporate all of those different, smeared ideas, all those different spectra involved. If we ask, is a lion feel sad for tearing up the gazelle? I mean, we need to take into consideration how lions might feel what we call emotions, and they might have emotions on a totally different. In a completely alien way for us to imagine. So not only could their emotions be on a spectrum that we might label as emotions, but it might be on a totally different scale. It might be measured by a totally different instrument or a totally different metric. And so we not only do we have to take into consideration, are their emotions different, but then we would also look at, or are their needs different? I mean, if they don't kill that gazelle, and again, I'm anthropomorphizing here. And again, I'm saying it again just to rub it into Richard's. But
Never
but
living that one down.
not only do we have to consider are they experiencing more or less emotion than we are they experiencing emotion in a different way than we do, and are they applying different values in different ways than we do? And so not only are we comparing apples to oranges, but we're comparing Martian apples to Earth oranges. I mean, it's not only a different scale, it's completely alien to each other. And so their perspective might be different, their goals might be different, even if they have goals in the same way that we do. And it's almost like an infinite regress of potential differences. And so it's hard to, it's like trying to grab onto a greased pig or something, right? It's just super slippery, and it's really hard for us to pin down, but it's fun to talk about. So I'm enjoying myself.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, same here.
I think sometimes these look. I'm from a philosophy background, as most everybody here knows anyway, and this is the thing that, and it's the thing on the internet which annoys me greatly when people have philosophical conversations, because they come at it as though there is a cut and dried answer to these things, and there is no cut and dried answer to most things in philosophy. They are most things in philosophy are ongoing discussions, despite what one side of an argument or other side of an argument or people with pet theories might want you to believe. Most discussions are ongoing, and I think this is the joy of conversations like this, the fact that we don't have a hard and fast answer to it, because it lots of these opinions are legitimate. And I think we've got to be very wary of people who come in and say, your opinion is not legitimate, this is the right thing to do.
Yeah. So, okay, Chase put something in the chat, and it says humans are animals and we are all sentient. And while I do agree with that, I also agree with what we discussed earlier, that even though we are all part of the animal kingdom, we all experience the world in such different ways, in such a different spectrum, that we cannot say that a fish experiences the world the way that a human does. That would be completely ridiculous thing to say. But they are also considered animals, and they are considered sentient. So just because one is the other doesn't equate the two to be exactly the same.
Yeah.
And even within our own species, okay, I was having a conversation earlier with in the show this morning with this person who is neurodivergent, and they're autistic and ADHD, and we were talking about the way that neurodivergent people experience the world. And Richard, you mentioned this thing about how the sensory input, how we experience sensory input.
Yeah.
And we can agree that autistic people, for example, experience I don't know, light or sound in a very different way than other people do. For myself, I cannot stand the touch of my hair on my skin. It will literally make me anxious and crazy, and that's completely different than other people like that will just wear their hair down. My kid wears their hair down, and there's like hairs all over their shirt and like arms, and I am like, please don't come near me right now. So it's like even within our own same species, our brains can be wired so differently. So it is expected that even though many animals have brains that we can study that look and react in similar ways, they are not exactly the same. And so maybe fish, like I said, fish or starfish don't have a brain. Fish. Okay.
An octopus have 9. So
Do they really? Okay.
There you go. All right. So like they have like 9 different inputs of the same stimulus.
So imagine the discussions that an octopus has with itself. We're just 4 of us here.
Right.
We just have 4 brains talking here. Imagine 9 in one head. Boy, that's a completely alien experience to us. And not only do we not understand, but we can't even understand how much we don't understand it.
Yeah. And this is what's so important about this is, and kind of the mistake of kind of lumping everyone into the kind of human category, lumping all non-human animals into the human categories. An octopus is a great, or octopi, however you want to say it, are a great example of this, because we don't know how those brains interact with each other. We know that they have each arm has an independent brain, and then there's a central brain, and each of those independent brain, I'm calling it a brain, but it's, it's more like a clump of nervous system, but each of those independent brains has control as an independent control, but we don't know to what
Yeah.
extent those brains are independent or part of the whole. We do not have that information, but it's a great example to show that it is, as Scott said, completely alien, and this is it. It begs such a huge mistake to say, well, humans are animals, therefore all animals experience things the same as humans. It's a massive mistake. It's a huge, huge mistake to make.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've never thought
So
about it from that
yeah.
perspective. You open my view on that, Richard, just by saying, that animals, that we can't lump them all together
Oh, wait
because,
till my book comes out. You'll have your mind blown.
well, I'm looking forward to that for sure.
That's funny because I did have some questions thought out about that, but now I'm rethinking them because you're making me think. So thank you. But speaking of consciousness, now I know this is your forte, Richard. Where do you think that the line is drawn? Sorry, my words combined. Like because, for example, we in the non-profits we covered this article about jellyfish and how two of them can merge their nervous systems to make one whenever one of them is severely damaged, like there's like part of it missing or something like that. So I was curious about it, so I looked up what other animals that seem to have no brain but do have a nervous system seem to also exhibit signs of consciousness as far as scientists can tell, like as far as we understand. So what is a brain required for consciousness, or where do you draw the line to your like
That's a golden
is
question,
there
isn't it? That's an I don't know from me.
okay.
I think I don't know if I've still got it. I might look for it and jump in with it in a bit. But I had the definition of life from NASA, and it's about 4 paragraphs long. It's a great long thing, and includes lots of nuance and stuff. We don't know. We don't know to what extent. We know that brains and nervous systems, and I would probably go down the Richard Firth God be here route and say the whole physical system is needed for consciousness. But to what extent is that? And to how does it manifest? That's the golden question. That's the one that no one quite knows the answer to, although some
Wow.
people, some theists think they do. But we
Where are you
don't
coming up
know.
with this? You're just making this up now, Rich?
Well, we don't know, and the thing, and that's so important in this to kind of say, look, this is a really really interesting area. Just consciousness, uh, on a whole, is a really 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 interesting area of study, and things like neurodiversity and all these different things are so important to all of that. I feel like I've been kind of overloaded with. With kind of taking this information in lately, because this is stuff I read all the time anyway. But I've literally been working on my book this last week,
You
and I've
have
been
brains
talking
on the
about this
brain.
very thing. So yeah, that and cosmology. I'm bored of cosmology. I'm bored of reading Albert Einstein's papers. Let me tell you, I've just had my head in books all week. So forgive me if I do start to go on, but I've got a pile of books next to me. One's called Think, which is a philosophy book. One's the Dictionary of Philosophy. One's the Oxford Dictionary of the Mind. One's all about psychology. In fact, 2 of them undergraduate psychology books. And this is like literally what I've been working my way through on that side of things. So it genuinely is something I'm passionate about. I read about all the time. I talk about all the time, and I can get overloaded with it. So do stop me if I get too much into it. But yeah, we
I love it.
Yeah,
I
I
love the
enjoy it
topic.
too.
So
So it's great to listen to you.
go on.
we have to. I think we have to say it's so important to say on these questions, these very very important questions. Like, you know, what actually is involved in consciousness, we do not know. And that is the $1,000,000 question. I took a long time to say one sentence, and so I'm going to let someone else jump in.
Well, and I think I don't mean to sound like a broken record here, but if we ask, do you have to have a brain to have consciousness? Well, we have a hazy definition of consciousness, but we also have a hazy definition of what it takes to be a brain. I mean, we have the typical human with the 2 hemispheres and so on. We've been talking about the octopus with their 9 brains, or as Top G in the comments said, it's really kind of one brain, but with 9 like localized sections to it. But
Upside.
and we could even say that we could go hard the other direction and say, well, let's not ask if it takes a brain to have a consciousness, but we could also define a brain as whatever it takes to have consciousness. And so and again, even saying that, I'm doing the exact same thing myself. I'm saying to have consciousness. Oh, you can check the box, I have consciousness, or you check the box and say I don't have consciousness. There's all these different levels of consciousness, but there's also different kinds of consciousness as well. And so, if we were to take the route of saying, well, a brain is what does consciousness, and I'm derailing myself here. If we talk about a brain as what it takes to make consciousness, then we can explore all the different kinds of quote unquote brains, which might be the brains that we're familiar with. There might be brains that we're learning every day out in the animal kingdom and possibly elsewhere. And it's now we're dealing with artificial intelligence as well. I mean, that's coming on strong in the last few years. I studied, my undergraduate degree is in computer science, and my focus was on artificial intelligence. And things have changed so much that would have been like 30 years ago that I did that. And so it's, things are changing so fast and in directions that we never would have imagined. And so our understanding of consciousness, it seems, is getting more and more hazy. But what we're really realizing is that we were maybe asking the wrong questions, or couching the answers in a different light that was maybe inappropriately strict or inappropriately rigid. But we're just it's like somebody who grew up in their hometown and then goes to Asia for a weekend or something. It's like the lights turn on and they say, whoa, I really know nothing about the world. That's what we're doing now. We're learning, wow, we're just getting a grip on how little we know about consciousness, or how little we know about brains and that kind of thing. And so I suppose that's what we have to do. I mean, if our goal is to understand things, then you have to wade through that mire to get to those gold nuggets.
Yeah, so it would be unfair to ask, do you have consciousness or do you not have consciousness? Like there
Right.
is just so much in the middle.
Right.
Like you say, levels, I guess, levels of consciousness that you could say, like even within our own understanding of human consciousness, we could say that we experience different levels of it when we're dreaming, when we are under anesthesia, when
Yeah.
part of our brain gets damaged, when we are under the influence of certain substances and such. So yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and I've got I don't know how much is this is public knowledge, so I'm going to be very cagey here. I've got a friend who's writing a book on artificial intelligence, and they have said that they have had to rewrite one of the chapters several times because the technology is advancing at such a rate
Yeah, the
that
progression.
each time that they've finished the kind of draft chapter, it has moved on. So they've had to kind of make the decision to say, right, this is it. This is the final draft, no matter what now. And so, yeah, it is a bit. And I found the NASA definition of life. If you want to sit through this, because this is long. So I'll let me know whether you want me to read it out or not, and I'll go for it if you do, and I'll just leave it if you don't.
I'm game.
Yeah, I'm good with
Okay.
hearing it too. Yeah.
So NASA's definition of life is: living things tend to be complex and highly organized. They have the ability to take in energy from the environment and transform it for growth and reproduction. Organisms tend towards homeostasis, an equilibrium of parameters that define their internal environment. Living creatures respond, and their stimulation fosters a reaction-like motion, recoil, and in advanced form, learning. Life is reproductive, as some kind of copying is needed for evolution to take hold through a population's mutation and natural selection. To grow and develop, living creatures need foremost to be consumers, since growth includes changing biomass, creating new individuals, and the shedding of waste. To qualify as a living thing, a creature must meet some variation for all these criteria. For example, a crystal can grow, reach equilibrium, and even move in response to stimuli, but lacks what commonly would be thought of as a biological nervous system. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is NASA's definition of life.
Oof.
It's a lot.
But you could recognize in there, I mean, they did highlight a few of the common, bullet points: respiration, consumption, reproduction, motility, excretion, stuff like that. I remember my very first teaching job was back in the 90s, and when I was in the Peace Corps. I was in West Africa, and I taught general science, and we had to break it down. We had a biology unit. We had to talk about what is life, and they gave us these 6 things or 7 things that had to be there for life. And it was very similar to what you were describing there. But I suppose NASA has a much more scientific way of interpreting that kind of question than I would have, because you can almost physically sense the nuance and the carefully couching what they say in that, and carefully trying to describe this amorphous blob that's in front of them. But and NASA, of course, has to define life in such a way that they're hoping to apply that to like discovering life on other planets, which would be radically different than what we have here. I mean, even the things that we find like in the the depths of the ocean and things like that, or in caves that have been isolated for millions of years, and people stumble on this cave that has its own little ecosystem. We're discovering just how many different ways this can go. And so, I mean, that totally makes sense to hear what they have to say. I'm amazed that they were even able to whittle it down that much.
So I will say, I was looking at the chat real quick, and Chase was asking us to look up the definition from a specific website from Cambridge, I believe it was, about animal consciousness. And I think that we all 4 of us here agree that we are not saying that animals do not have consciousness, and that we agree that animals do have consciousness.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's like we were just kind of like trying to cover the nuances of the differences in types of behaviors and
Right.
stuff like that. Not denying at all, but that they have consciousness. And we were just questioning whether maybe or maybe not animals who do not have a brain, whether they have consciousness. And we agreed that we don't know that. So we don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, I think my criticism, if I had one to that, would be that it's not in question that animals have consciousness. It's a mistake to assume that their consciousness and their perceptionary field is like ours. Would be my kind of clickbait response to that.
Yeah, agreed.
That makes total sense.
Kind of like the same way that we were defining sentience, like generally speaking, sentience will be like whether we feel pain and whether we feel emotions and stuff like that. But the emotions that we feel as humans and the way that we experience pain could be completely different to what animals do. I do agree, though, that animals, as far as we have observed and scientists have sort of come to the consensus, that animals do feel pain in a similar way that humans have, because we can tell that their behavior ends up being very similar. So I don't know. Again, I could be wrong on that one. I'm not expert. Okay, but they do have very similar nervous systems, which will make us assume.
Yeah, that they feel certain pain and
Yeah,
Yeah,
certain, yeah, feelings the
and
same way.
even fish,
right.
which we would think like fish could
Yeah,
feel
I
pain.
think what makes more sense is not to ask whether or not non-human animals have consciousness, but to ask instead, what type of consciousness do they have and to what extent do they have it?
Yeah,
That's
like
a better question.
what
Yeah.
level
Yeah,
of consciousness? Yeah,
and I mean they could have emotions that we don't even understand, that we don't even have, because we don't have the labels for them, right?
Right,
So
right. In
it could be
fact, you
something
would
that,
expect that. I
yeah,
would be very surprised if that wasn't the case.
yeah,
Yeah.
same, agree with that. um so on that, if we are ready to move on to the veganism portion, because we covered a whole hour of the other part. So
All right. All right.
I don't know how
Yeah.
long you guys have.
Let's jump right
If
in.
you, yeah. So whenever you guys want to give up, we can give up. Like I got the whole day free. So
Let's go until we hate each other, but stop like 5 minutes or 5 minutes before that. Right.
okay.
Just enough because I still want to be friends. And so let's stop before we start
On
have a
that
breakup.
point, and Scott's piss taking of my mispronunciation earlier on. Can I just point out to everybody watching this that I am technically Scott's boss?
To some extent,
Oh,
yes. Yes, that's true. Yep. Okay.
watch your mouth, Mister.
Yep.
Watch it. So, Richard, you are the epistemology expert here. I am just a student who's very open to learning this type of questioning. So, I wanted to kind of approach the veganism conversation from that perspective. So, I have a lot of questions, and I will try to just ask them, and you guys answer, and then I will, you know, avoid being judgy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Scott, don't let me railroad this because I am very likely to. So feel free to jump in at any time.
And of course, feel free to like ask me to give my perspective if you wish to hear my side or whatever. Like I'm open to having it as whatever way it may come up. What was that? Is that a question over here?
No, I'm just putting up a statement. Well, yeah, kind of a question. That's kind of similar to what I had asked earlier. So it makes you wonder if a lion were to develop a self-reflective form of consciousness, akin to how we experience consciousness, would it adopt veganism?
Oh yeah, we kind of
Yeah,
covered this
cover
one.
that.
Like
Yeah.
we were,
So
yeah.
I,
So
I
we
jumped the
I've
gun.
might
I
seen The
want
jumped
to
the
Lion, the
gun
Witch, and
earlier.
the Wardrobe, and I don't recall Aslan eating any other animals. So, you might have your answer right there.
Jesus was a vegan.
That's funny. So before we get deep into it, I'm gonna clarify that before off the starting line, that I don't think that veganism should be forced. I don't think there should be like laws making everybody vegan or anything like that. I don't think that is reasonable. It is unreasonable to expect 100% of the world to go vegan. That is just not gonna happen. It's not how it works. That because there are so many different implications. Like there's people that cannot do it due to medical reasons, lack of resources. They live in food deserts. They don't have access to food, or they live in like isolated areas where they completely depend on whatever they can hunt or gather and stuff like that. There's poverty, among other things. So, but I do think that those who have the resources or the privilege, rather, could safely give it a go. Maybe I'm certain. I'm certainly not here to like convince anybody to go vegan right now. All right, I just want to have like this conversation because I think that as promoters of skepticism is a fun and interesting conversation to have, even within people who everybody's like, oh, well, you're atheists, you must all think the same. And that this conversation is going to prove that that's not the case.
I'm getting this
Right?
feeling that we're at a meeting where we're looking at some vacation properties in Florida, and you're like, no, 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 we're just going to have a little chat here, and then the hard sell is going to come at the end, right?
It's
Oh,
coming.
yeah,
It's coming.
baby.
Who's ready to sign on the dotted line today?
I think what
Are
AJ
you-
said was really important, and I think I've spent more than my fair share of time defending vegans' rights to call talk heathen. We had a couple of vegan heavy episodes at the start. I think it was the start of last year, and there were so many people commenting on the shows saying, why are you talking about veganism? We don't want to know about veganism. And my response to that was, look, I'm the boss, so fuck you. And I'm interested in ethics. It's part of my academic background and my academic interest. And veganism is absolutely welcome on Talk Heathen. So it is definitely a worthwhile conversation to have. And if people don't want to hear it, then I would probably suggest that they come from either one staunch side or another, because when you get into the nuances of it, like everything, or maybe it's just me being old and boring, I think it gets really, really interesting.
Absolutely. I agree. Yeah, and I like having the conversation with other vegans or with non-vegans or people who are just plant-based, which is not the same as veganism, by the way. So yeah, I think it's just a very interesting topic to have a conversation, to give a platform to, right? The people who are critical thinkers and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I personally realized that I still hold on to a lot of religious ideologies, you could say, that I never even realized came from that. And one of them for me was the idea that humans are superior to all animals and that we can do anything we want with them just because we were created by God and stuff like that. And I think that was like, once I didn't believe anymore in a God, it was just still there, like, we're still above or something like that. So it was like, you know what, maybe not. So maybe there's other aspects to consider. So yeah, I like to see whether people feel the same way or not. And speaking of the word, earlier, Richard, you say that we were probably going to get into the definition of veganism, and that time is here.
Yeah. Okay, so stop me at any point. And I mean that in all seriousness, because I can talk when I get going. So I've got no problem with veganism. I agree with many concerns that vegan activists have. A lot of them, I think we are on a lot of the same page with. I don't think that veganism is a moral necessity, and I do have problems with that position. And one of that, let me just clarify when to begin before I go into kind of the definitions of veganism. That when I say vegan in this conversation, I'm not referring to vegans or people who are vegans. I'm referring specifically to vegans who think everybody should be vegan as a moral imperative.
Okay.
So I don't want, because I don't have any arguments with veganism. I agree with a lot of the concerns that people who are vegan have. And I think this is sometimes lost in translation. So I think it's very, very important to emphasize that at the beginning of this. However, getting onto the actual definition of veganism, I think
It's people who only eat at casino buffets, right? Is that it? Right? I thought that was it, right? That's what I signed up for. We're talking about something else.
I think and AJ, jump in if I get any of this wrong, because I am painting with a broad brush here. I'm talking about my own experience with kind of vegans who want, as I said, to be that think veganism is a moral imperative, and that is that veganism is the kind of, I'm going to give a kind of broad brush definition. Veganism is the minimum standard we can do in order to reduce harm. I think that's basically that's the basic definition of veganism that I have heard from people, and I think that for me is, I think that's a problem.
Could you repeat that? So what's the definition of veganism?
The one I've most often heard is that we can do the minimum standard of harm we can do. This for me, by the way, is special pleading in a fucking massive way, but we'll get onto that. But the minimum standard of harm we can do, while kind of upholding a moral standpoint. I don't know, AJ, please jump in if I've crucified that in any way. I may not be wording it very well, but that's the kind of the most widespread definition I've heard from vegan activists. And sometimes it includes a couple of more things, sometimes it includes a couple of less things, but that's the kind of the main point of it. And specifically, and this is also very important, that it is killing animals for food. So veganism is the act of avoiding killing animals for food and doing the minimum harm that we can. AJ, I want you to kind of pull me up if you have any problems with that definition before I continue.
No, I think that is very similar to the understanding that I have of it, which is, and I think that there is a big misconception. I'm glad that you did not sort of word it in this way, because a lot of people that I have heard just say that vegans don't want to do any harm, and
Yeah.
that is just not possible. Like, you can't grow plants without doing any harm. Like, you're still going to do some kind of harm to, like, the environment, to, like, using water, I don't know, using the land, killing, like, small rodents and insects. So you're still going to be doing some harm. So the way that you worded it, doing the minimum standard of harm possible, is the way that I also interpret it, and which is what appeals to me, because I'm like, no, there is no way that I can do zero harm. It's just reducing harm. That is the goal. So I agree with your definition. Yeah.
And thank you for that. I didn't want to I wanted to make sure we were on the same page before I continued, because I've got a fucking problem with that. And so I wanted to make sure we were on the same page with that.
Okay.
I think it's special pleading is the long and the short of it. I think you're putting an arbitrary line, and that arbitrary line is based on privilege. And when I say you, I'm
No, yeah.
you as an
No, like
individual.
me, like everybody. Yeah.
And I think you're putting an arbitrary line on there based around privilege. And that's not to say that it's easy to go vegan, because I'm not saying that at all. But I think that's not the minimum ethical standard vegans could adopt. And I've got a specific kind of example about this. So one of the arguments that vegans use, which I agree with, is deforestation. And it is a legitimate argument. But there's also massive amounts of deforestation in mining for precious metals. And those mines supply the metal that powers your laptop vegans and your cell phones vegans, which you use. So we've got two major problems here. First is the argument that there is more deforestation in animal farming, and that is a fallacy. It's a fallacy of relative privation, and it's the appeal known as the appeal to worst problems. It's a logical fallacy that dismisses an argument of complaint by asserting that there are more important or severe problems. So if your argument is deforestation is bad, therefore we should be vegan, then you should also hold that deforestation is bad, therefore we shouldn't use things with electronics circuits that have precious metals in. So, and that's a massive, massive problem
Mm.
in that definition that vegans use. The second problem with the arbitrary line that's used is that vegans could live without cell phones or computers, but it would affect their level of comfort to do so. And I've had debates with vegans. I've had many debates with vegans over the years. And I've had debates with vegans where they've actually tried to get around this by saying, well, I need it for work. But get another job.
Right, right.
There are plenty out there that don't require computers. The reason that vegans do not do this isn't because there aren't jobs, but the best jobs and the jobs that increase your comfort level and allow for privileged quality to life tend to use computers in one capacity or another. And there's a very, very simple thought experiment I would put to vegans who use this argument about deforestation and kind of this special pleading that I've just highlighted. If your job entailed you to eat meat, would you stay in it? If the answer is no, then there is no excuse to stay in a job where you use computers or cell phones. So for me, the very definition of veganism is a problem because you're choosing arbitrary standards to say don't do X and simultaneously making excuses for doing Y, which is just as ethically questionable. So,
If not more so.
yeah, and along the same lines, which was the other part of the kind of definition I gave at the beginning of this, is the phrasing of killing animals for food rather than killing animals in the process of making food. And again, we come back to this kind of what I would probably call an excuse of doing the best that is reasonably possible, which is, we've already seen is fallacy ridden anyway. But what is different about the animals killed for food and the animals killed in the farming process? Because when we consider this, what we actually find is the process of killing the animals, regardless of the rearing conditions, is far more ethical than being torn to shreds by the blades of combine harvester or collecting crops or being slowly poisoned by insecticides. Vegans seem to be quite happy for this in crop production, but they're against the killing of animals in meat production. And I think the kind of biggest ethical issue here is the fact that the way the animals are raised and treated. And in that, I agree with vegans wholeheartedly on most of these issues. But I think the actual definition of vegan, I think it's specifically constructed. I do believe it has been specifically constructed in a way to kind of special plead veganism and this, reduction of harm. And, it doesn't really matter if a few animals get killed in the production of food, but we're not concerned about those so much. We're bothered about the animals being killed for food. I think these are all very, very important points that aren't addressed adequately in the conversations I've had.
Because I think there's a difference between how you, like you were saying, that there's a difference between killing an animal for food and the way that animals are killed for food in factory farming. Like if you ask any vegan whether a tribe in the middle of nowhere who has no access to like supermarkets and shipping of food, and they completely rely on the small land that they have, and I don't know, fishing and hunting and whatever, they would be like, well, yeah, no, it's okay for them because their situation. So I think that there is a double standard there. I do have to agree with what you're saying.
I'm glad you mentioned us that as well, because I've got a thought experiment about that.
Uh-oh.
Ain't it good having a philosopher on your show?
Well,
Awesome. Yeah.
I've never even heard that perspective. Like, you really got my mind thinking the way that you brought up that, you know,
Yeah,
how you
because
portrayed that. I've never thought about, how I don't know. You got me really thinking,
Mm.
Richard. You
yeah,
really
because
did.
I always defend what you're saying.
Are you ready
Like
to give up veganism?
No,
I
no,
am
no, no,
not.
no, 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 no.
Richard's
No,
trying to
no.
break him.
Uh,
I'm not
That is
vegan.
not what
I'm not
that is
vegan,
not what
so
I
it's
No,
all
want
I
to
know,
good.
I
do.
know, I know, I
oh
know.
no, Joe's not vegan. Joe's
Yeah.
not vegan.
Oh, okay.
He's
All
not.
right.
AJ
He,
tries hard enough to get me there, but
Right,
yeah,
right.
I love barbecue too much. So
Mhm.
yeah.
yeah, like we eat sometimes, like I don't know, like once a week or twice a week. I will make like a vegan type meal that Joe will also eat. I keep mine stuff vegan, but he still eats meat. Um, but yeah, that's like I'm not gonna be like forcing him to do it. That's what I was saying earlier. Like I'm not gonna force anybody to do it. Like it's my bodily autonomy. Okay, bodily autonomy. If you don't want to be vegan, you don't have to be.
Yeah.
But I do like to have the conversation. And I was
Yeah.
thinking, I had a thought about what Richard was saying um, about the computers and the phones, and I'm trying to bring my brain back into it. Exactly what I was going to say. Uh, I think it was that one could argue that sure, vegans do defend not using animals for food. I don't know, they're not using animal for clothing or for animal testing in things like toiletries and such. Um, but it's always about the reduction in harm. And as I said, I don't think anybody expects to have zero harm. So I can see in their mind, and I'm not defending the decision, but I can see how maybe they could reach that conclusion that, okay, I am giving up this and this and this, but I can't give up like 100% of all things and live in like off the grid to like,
But they can. This is the thing,
well,
and I'm not suggesting
yeah.
that they should. I'm not
Oh, yeah,
suggesting
yeah.
that all vegans should, and I
Yeah.
don't think. I'm not saying that there isn't any sacrifice for people being vegan, because there is, and sometimes it comes from lots of different aspects. But in a lot of ways, there is this arbitrary line which defines veganism, and it seems to be the same thing, but it seems to neglect so much other stuff, which people, and it doesn't have to go to the extent of living off grid. It doesn't have to go that far,
Yeah.
but you could, if you really wanted to.
Right.
You
Yeah.
could, but it doesn't have to go that far. But even just like this thing, and this is the reason I use deforestation, because this is actually an argument that vegans use in order for to say to people, eating meat is wrong. You shouldn't do it because it causes deforestation. And this is exactly why I use this response back, because deforestation is a massive, massive problem in the mining of precious metals. And it's in this cell phone right here. It's in the computer I'm using now. And that comes from deforestation. Those precious metals come from deforestation. There's no getting away from it. So why are you special pleading for veganism and saying, well, we should be vegan because deforestation, but not, well, we shouldn't be using things with computer chips in and precious metals in because of deforestation.
Mhm.
That is special pleading. That is literally special pleading. And I think there are lots of logical fallacies and kind of bad argumentation from veganism as a as I say, as a kind of you should do it perspective, rather than just someone, your average Joe being vegan. And I think I've heard, stop me at any point because I will go on, like I say, there are a couple of fallacies that I've had leveled personally against me by vegans,
Mhm.
that I want to kind of jump into. If it's relevant at this time to do it. AJ, if there's anything you want to say on, or Joe or Scott, if there's anything you want to say on what I've said already, any disagreements, any points or anything you want to make, do so before I jump into this, because I don't want to railroad this. I don't want to make it the Richard show.
Well, I maybe I'll just slip in here. I was just thinking that it's difficult. I mean, if we're talking about, is it moral to be a vegan, or is it immoral to not be a vegan? I mean, we have to, there's a difference between, I think of Ray Comfort when I say this. There's a difference between doing something immoral and being an immoral person, right? Ray Comfort, one of his famous things is, have you ever lied, right? So who lies, right? Liars do. So if you lie, that makes you a liar. Well, not exactly. I mean, if you lie, that means, yeah, I suppose technically in one aspect of the word, you are a liar, but in another way, it's not necessarily a character judgment. And so, you mentioned earlier that we really, you can't have an existence. And I know this totally sounds like I'm trying to justify my own pet perspective, and I probably am. I'm a human too. I have just as much of a chance to be irrational as anybody else. But you can't. I mean, our existence depends on consumption. In that, what you read from NASA earlier about what it means to be alive, that part of the definition of being alive is that you will consume things in your environment. And so how and why we consume things, we do have some control over that, but we are going to be causing harm. And so causing harm, according to the way we define morality, is immoral. And so by that, put two and two together there, we see, according to NASA's definition of life and Sam Harrison's definition of morality, being alive is to be immoral, is to do immoral things. And so it's really, I think that's where a lot of the nuance comes in, so I agree, AJ was talking about the idea of minimizing harm, or at least lowering the amount of harm that we do to what we might consider to be a reasonable level. Clearly we have to do some harm, as Richard was pointing out, with the we all use computers. None of us are pushing those away, saying, oh, this is an immoral thing. And so, if we, and again, this totally is, as I think it sounds to me like I'm totally trying to just excuse my own behavior. And again, I probably am, but we have to do some harm in some way. And I think that if a vegan says you're immoral because you eat steaks or something like that, I mean, that's it in a Ray Comfort kind of way. Yeah, it's true, but that's not really an interesting way to have a discussion. Having a talk with Ray about whether or not you're a liar sounds to me like one of the dullest things that I can think of. And so it really, I think jumping to that kind of statement like that, trying to impose these black and white strictures or distinctions on us, when really that's a completely inappropriate way of approaching the issue. And so I like talking about it. That's why I wanted so much to be on today with both of you and Richard, as I thought, I want to learn about a bunch of stuff, and I want to have interesting discussions. But saying this is it, this is you, I think that's not only is it unfair and hypocritical in many cases, as Richard was pointing out, but it's also denying part of what it is to be a human. And so I think it's really selling us short if we try to approach the problem that way. I think it's really missing out on opportunities to do exactly what we're doing right here today, welcoming the nuance, embracing the nuance, discussing the nuance. I mean, if I were given the option of eating lab grown meat, in place of the steak that was just killed in Wisconsin yesterday, yeah, probably. I mean, I'd give it a try if it was reasonably close to what I like to have in my life. I would definitely do something like that.
I'm
But
going to get onto that shortly, but
okay,
please
all right.
continue. I just
Oh,
wanted to
But
introduce.
yeah,
not
same.
doing
I
that
wanted
today.
to discuss that too.
I don't think
Uh,
that that necessarily makes me an immoral person. I
yeah,
will admit I do immoral things sometimes, and so what I try to do is mitigate those immoral things that I do. I try to lessen the amount and degree of immorality that I do, and I think it really shuts down conversation, which is to me the worst sin here. I
yeah.
think if especially on a
Yeah.
discussion like this where there's really is no cut and dry answer, I
I
think
agree.
trying
I
to
like.
talk about it as if there were a cut and dry answer is really just punting at that point.
I
Yeah.
think on
Yeah,
that point as well, I think it's very important to point out, which I was going to do at some point, that I think I agree with you 100%. I think one of the other things, rather than just shutting stuff down, is there are legitimate issues here. And I think if vegans were less, and again, I say vegans with this specific terminology in
definition
mind.
we had earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh, if vegans were less inclined to tell people that they should be vegan and more inclined to say, let's work together on improving the state of animal farming, then we would be in a much better position now than we are in achieving that shared goal. There are lots of problems in vegan argumentation that I've come across, and I want to kind of go through a few of those things. One I've heard a lot, and AJ, I'm going to pick on you because you said this in the show with Chase. So I'm going to directly pick on you on this one. But I have heard it so many times. It's been leveled against me hundreds of times. And that's the argument about not hitting a dog, but taking a cow into a slaughterhouse. Do you think it's all right to hit a dog? Well, you say no, but you're happy to take a cow into a slaughterhouse. That's a false analogy. The correct analogy would people who wouldn't randomly hit a dog randomly hit a cow.
Right.
And the answer is
okay.
no. In most cases, they would not. I mean, there might be your odd psychopath who might do, but in general, you're not going to get somebody who wouldn't hit a dog randomly who would go along and randomly hit a cow. It is a false analogy to say.
Okay, so will it be a better analogy to say, would you take a dog into a slaughterhouse?
Yeah, that I
Okay.
mean, that's a direct analogy.
Okay, okay. I'm just like trying to correct myself.
Yeah, because the same
Yeah, yeah.
satisfaction
I
towards
appreciate
each,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
But
Because they're
that's
not on the same level. You're saying.
yeah.
Okay.
I've picked
Gotcha.
on you. I've picked on you with that, but that's
No, no. I
I've heard
appreciate it.
that many
I learned something.
times.
I learned
But
something. So thank you.
Even more than that, you would have to ask that question to a person who doesn't have any side qualms about eating a dog, right? So
yeah,
if
Yeah.
somebody is likely to eat a cow, they would say, "Oh, well, yeah, of course we got to kill the cow somehow." But they don't want to eat a dog because of their cultural upbringing, because of, or whatever the reasons are they don't like, because they're so damn cute. By the way, my dog is a Welsh corgi, so just wanted to throw that out there.
Like
great.
somebody
Thanks for
over
that.
here.
That's an in joke for anybody who's not
Right,
aware.
right.
When I say joke, so one of the things that really frustrates me about these conversations with vegans, which is not necessarily a fallacy, but it can be depending on how they're leveling it, is that when vegans say, "Oh, non-vegans making logical fallacies," that's potentially, depending on the phrasing specifically, that could be a fallacy. But even if it's not a fallacy, I'm going to go through a couple of these fallacies that have been leveled at me. When vegans say you're making a logical fallacy. One is the naturalism fallacy, which we talked about earlier with Joe. And I find this really puzzling because I'm going to explain what I said and then the fact that it was leveled against about a naturalism fallacy. So
Okay.
I've said many times that animals living on an ethical farm with access to medicine, shelter, and no predators would have a much better standard of living than the same animal in the wild that was prone to disease, weather, and predators. And this has happened more than once. I've been accused many times of making a naturalistic fallacy. But that's not the that's not the naturalistic fallacy.
That's almost the reverse.
That is almost the reverse, yeah.
Yeah.
And but so many times when I've made that statement, I've had people say to me, "You're making a naturalistic fallacy. You're making a naturalistic fallacy." I think just because they're seeing part of the argument compared to nature, and in their mind they jump into that. But that's not the naturalistic fallacy. That's not what I'm doing. The other one, and this one's got really, really popular in vegan circles in the past couple of years, is the nirvana fallacy, which goes something like, the meat eater is making them a nirvana fallacy because they say they will wait until lab-grown meat is available. I told you we'd get to it, Scott, before stopping to eat meat. And for me personally, and as Scott has demonstrated, it might not be relevant to everybody who eats meat, but for me personally, this isn't relevant to me. It's too black and white. I think this is a really black and white way to appraise this question, because it could be, if we abandoned factory farming and turned to a fully ethical system, that even when lab-grown meat becomes available, that I'd still eat animal meat. So there's many, many factors that come into this, like the price, the availability, other ethical considerations like environmental impact, energy use. They would all inform whether I would make the change to lab-grown meat.
Cultural influences.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots of different things. So there's a version of reality where I might eat lab-grown meat, but I certainly wouldn't sit waiting for it and then suddenly jump to it over animal meat when it becomes available. That's not something I personally would do. I get it when vegans, I've seen vegans talking to other people who have said, well, if lab-grown meat became available, I'd stop eating animals.
Yeah.
I get it. But it doesn't apply to me because it would take a lot more factors. As I said earlier, several times, there's a lot of subtleties in these conversations which need bearing in mind. And along a similar line is the argument for, feel free to stop me at any point, people, if you want, because I will continue.
Yeah, no, let me just add that that even vegans will need to assess whether lab-grown meat is sustainable, and like whether it's harmful to the environment, whether it's causing any other kind of
very good
consequences
point.
of it. Yeah, because I have seen them talk about it. Texas actually, or governor banned it, banned it. It's not even out yet, but he's like, nope, you're not gonna have it. Whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, perfect point, AJ, and I appreciate you making it.
Yeah, please go on.
Along a similar line to the previous point is the argument for carnism. So carnism, for those who don't know, I know Joe was only introduced to it when you talked to Chase, because I do watch your shows, believe it or not. The term carnism was coined by social psychologist Melanie Joy in 2001, and it gained popularity in her book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, which Dan has made, objectively Dan, has made reference to before. Yep. The idea contains several concepts and is used differently by different vegans, but the most common interaction I have had comes across the lines of, you would eat a cow, but not a dog, because it's socially acceptable in our society to eat cows, but not dogs. And this isn't necessarily true, because while I wouldn't eat a dog in my own country, this isn't because I wouldn't eat a dog, but because of the social repercussions of doing so. So in other words, I am not being a carnist, but I do fear reprisals from other people who might be carnists. So whether I'd eat a dog in countries where it is socially acceptable to eat dogs would as with that previous accusation of the Nirvana fallacy, depend on different factors. I wouldn't go into I've seen videos of dogs being caged in other countries. I wouldn't go and eat dogs who had been like brought up in those conditions to eat, because the way they're brought up is vile. I wouldn't do it. But if you had dogs running around on ethical farms, I like trying different foods. I've eaten kangaroo meat, I've eaten different meat, emu meat, different foods from around the world when I've had the opportunity to try different foods. That's no different for dogs. And I have a dog in my family, so I'm not that I'm like I hate dogs,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm quite happy to try things. So carnism is not something that really. I said the biggest effect of carnism for me personally is the repercussions from other people who may be carnists themselves. Because if I sat in the middle of the city where I live eating a dog burger, I would get lynched without a doubt. You know what I mean? So those things are really important to take into account. And speciesism is another claim which is often leveled. And like carnism, the definition changes a little bit depending on who you speak to.
Mm-hmm.
The man who coined the phrase, psychologist Richard Ryder, defined it as a prejudice or attitude of bias in favor of the interests of members of one's own species and against those of members of other species. And that is a very, very loose definition to me. And I think the core idea isn't a question, for me anyway, isn't a question of speciesism, but it can be applied as a subcategory of in-grouping. I think that's what speciesism is really about. I think it's just a subcategory of that. And I think it's incorrect. And I think possibly also even a bit ludicrous to suggest that as a person, I favour the interests of people over cows' big black and white banner, without any subtleties attached, because that claim is a huge generalization. In my in-group, personal in-group, it's relatively small and it includes non-human animals.
Yeah,
But
because
when, please,
earlier we were making the differentiation between anthropomorphizing non-human animals, and I was questioning whether, and now you're discussing this, I am wondering whether we do say that humans are part of the animal kingdom, but at the same time, species does matter. The word species, and yeah, what speciesism, as Chase points out, may be discriminatory in a certain way. Like, we have to figure out a way, like, what makes the humans different from non-human animals, like whether there is a biological argument for separating us from other animals, like even from animals who are much more closely related to us, like let's say apes, right? Like we see them as our closest relative. So what exactly separates us from them? Like, will we eat apes?
Mm.
Right?
yeah, for me,
Just
it's a
kind of
kind
like,
of. Sorry, AJ, go on.
no, I was just like kind of like brainstorming all these questions over everything that you were just talking about.
Well, I think the idea of speciesism, though, is another one of those areas where it's not really a cut and dry. Take, for example,
Yeah.
racism. Okay, people
Yeah.
can be discriminating against people in other racial groups, and I think we can generally agree that that's a bad thing. But how far do you want to take that? I mean, for example, let's say I, as a white man, am attracted to a particular type of partner, right? And so if I'm not attracted to somebody in a different racial group, does that mean I'm a racist? Well, strictly speaking, yes. But it matters, the degree and the outcome and that kind of thing. It does make a difference. And so it's not simply a cut and dry matter of you're a racist or you're not. And I think the same thing applies to species. The reason that, our species has evolved to favor other members of our species. And even within the human species, obviously we have in groups and out groups within. I mean, we can't even go a day without getting in a fight with other people about this kind of thing. And so it's now we could I'm not arguing that that makes it okay because we've evolved that way, but it does explain why we feel that way and we feel pushed in that way. And I think that that's something that should be considered when deciding on the morality of the way that we act. I think it's another one of those cases where you can't help but doing harm. If we're just gonna, if I want to show that I'm not a racist, do I have to agree to go out on a date with anybody who approaches me or any random person? And so it seems impossible to actually make a sound judgment based off of those shifting scales, and it seems impossible to really expect somebody to go that far to make that decision. Now, when I talk to vegans, if I have a lengthy discussion with somebody who's a vegan, usually for the next few weeks, I'm going to be eating less meat. I mean, it does affect me. And so I do take those kind of things into consideration. I will freely admit I do things that are immoral, but as we've talked about already, that might be unavoidable. That doesn't excuse it, but it does explain it. And so, applying this to veganism, I think the expectation is not, it's not as cut and dry as it's being presented. It's not even necessarily fair to couch the question in that way, because it doesn't take into account just our humanity and our existence. We consume, we make choices, we do discriminate to some degree, and that's just the way things are. And again, we can try to I was going to say we can try to minimize harm, but that's not even really what we try to do. We try to maybe mitigate our harm. We try to lessen our
That's a
harm.
good point.
We
Yeah.
try to keep our harm to a reasonable level. And how we define a reasonable level, of course, is open to maybe
It,
we'll do that next weekend. We'll have a discussion.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
because that could
Yeah,
vary for sure.
yeah.
it
And so
will.
I think the whole thing, as long as we can have a discussion where we're not shutting down communication, where we're not shutting
Yeah.
down sharing ideas, I think it can be productive. And I think that, caring, responsible, moral human beings can disagree on things like this. And I think that doing something that's immoral does not make you an immoral person necessarily.
Yeah.
And
I mean, because
that needs to be considered.
yeah, because I could argue, this makes me think of something that I always discuss with people in the activist spheres, and they're like, well, why don't you do something about this, or why don't you do something about that? And it's like, look, I have a limited bandwidth. I cannot cover every single cause, even the ones that I care about. All right, like
Definitely.
even the
Yes.
ones that matter or that affect me. I
Right.
do what I can with the resources that I have, with the energy that I have, with the time that I have, with the monetary, whatever it may be. And so, I don't know. Let's say what we're doing here right now could be considered some type of activism, right? Like speaking out about it, or even when we go and speak up against religious harms and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Talking, like going to protest, whatever you can do, right? Whatever your personal circumstances allow you to do. And I think veganism should be taken in the same way. But I also agree that there are so many, like with the definition that Richard gave of vegan, who are seen as very extreme and very much like it's my way or the highway. And I hope that in the future it's not that way as much. That maybe these conversations help people understand that there are people that agree with the vegan values, with I guess with the more broad vegan
Mhm.
values and not the more extreme ones, right? Like minimizing harm.
Yeah.
Um, like we can't all give up 100% of the animal products, in every single way. We can't all give up every single thing that affects deforestation or that affects water supplies or that affects the air quality or water contamination and all of that. Like, would I love to do all that and do like the very minimum amount of harm? Sure, but I
Mhm.
can't.
Right.
So we have to be open more. Like I hope that vegans become more open to whatever somebody is doing as far as reducing harm, as far as reducing the amount of factory farming or the harm that they do to the animals that they eat. Obviously, yeah, I wouldn't want anybody to hurt the animals like Chase
Right.
is saying, but it's unreasonable. It's unreasonable. And so
Something just occurred to me just now. If I'm talking to a vegan and they tell me that I have to stop eating meat or I'm immoral or I'm an immoral person, if they have the discussion with me that way, that makes me less likely to follow along with what they say. So you could argue that them arguing with me that way was actually causing more harm than if they had taken a more nuanced discussion with
Yeah.
me. Because like I said
absolutely.
before, if I do have a discussion with a vegan, a reasonable discussion, I won't feel defensive, and I will usually say, hey, let's have some fish this week or something, or
Yeah.
let's cut down, let's have some more chicken, let's cut back on our red meat, or whatever it is we happen to be doing. And so if minimizing harm is the goal, and if you don't minimize harm, you're being immoral, then telling that to somebody is an immoral act because it's not minimizing their harm, because it's not influencing their behavior as much as it could.
Right, and minimizing harm looks completely different to different people.
Yeah.
Like even my teenager who's autistic has a lot of issues with the textures of food. So I can count on my hands the number of foods that they eat. Um, like there's like one vegetable and one fruit. Okay, so do I feed them meat? I do. Even though I don't eat it, I feed them meat because otherwise they will either throw up their food, they will not even be able to get them down their throat, they will be malnourished, they could potentially have severe health issues to the point that it could be fatal. They already have a heart condition, so it's like not having these very few amounts of animal products that they consume will be a lot more harmful to them. And do I put the do I put the harm of animals above the harm to my child? That will also be a moral question, right? So as far as morality goes, I will be more inclined to protect the life of my child, of my own species, of my own blood.
I
So
Right.
have a thought experiment for that.
okay, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's hear. Let's hear it.
Hit it with us.
Right.
I am going to come on to that in a minute. I want to say to Scott, I'm not sure if you were making a naturalistic fallacy when you said
Oh.
it's the way that we are. So therefore,
No, I
that's what we
specified.
do.
I said just because it's the way we are, I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm just
Right.
saying that
Okay.
explains why we're the way we are.
Yeah. No. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I misheard. Sorry. That's on me. So I've got a couple of things on the back of what you guys were saying. So let me just try and gather my thoughts. So I want to kind of circle back a little bit to this speciesism thing because I think this is very important, and it will lead on to what you were saying, AJ. And I think when we're talking about in groups, and we're throwing specific thought experiments out there, I think it becomes a bit silly when we look at this kind of thing of speciesism, of saying, well, you care about humans, the specific kind of definition that was given of speciesism by the guy who kind of invoked it, which says, if I can just find it, a prejudice or attitude of bias in favor of the interests of members of one's own species and against those of members of the other species. That was a specific quote. And I think when we kind of apply that in thought experiments, it becomes a bit silly, because if a man was kicking cows randomly on every occasion, I would favor the cow. So that you try this for yourself. Just have a think about this. It's easy. It's not a difficult one. A man is kicking a cow. Would you A, allow the man to continue kicking the cow because you have a bias in favor of the human, or B, intervene and stop the man causing needless harm? I think that's pretty easy. And then we can kind of extend that and say, what about if a cow was attacking a human? In this case, you might try and stop the cow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Fair enough. What if it was attacking two humans, a newborn baby and a child rapist? Well, you might stop it attacking the newborn, but the rapist? Maybe not. Maybe you'd let it do it. These are all very, very important to the claim of speciesism.
Yeah.
Because that specific kind of definition of speciesism, which the guy who came up with it put forward. But while we're on thought experiments, and this is going to circle back to what AJ eventually, this is going to circle back to what AJ was saying. Here's one that might just demonstrate that speciesism isn't in and of itself morally wrong at all. So I want to stress before I put this forward, because as I said earlier, speciesism to me is a kind of subcategory of in-grouping. So there are many, many cases, which I'm sure we can all think of, where in-grouping is absolutely wrong. And even within like the subject we're talking about, which is farming. So I'm using this as an experiment to show and kind of all things being equal example. So it might not be as cut and dry as people to show that kind of speciesism is not as cut and dry as people would have you imagine. So imagine, AJ, I'm aiming this at you because this directly relates to what you were saying earlier, that there are two children in a house fire and they're equal in every way. And I say that to avoid silly caveats like one is going to turn out to be the next Hitler. So you can only save one of these two children, but one is a complete stranger and one is your child. Is it morally wrong to choose the child, your own child, over the stranger? I would suggest that it's not. I would suggest attempting to save any of them is a virtue, and letting both die is wrong. But choosing A over B, even though you have a connection to A, is no more morally repugnant than choosing B over A.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, you could also argue that choosing the one that's not your own is moral as well, like whether that's moral or not.
They're both moral.
Because you're saving a life. Yeah.
Saving any of them is moral, the moral choice. But specifically choosing your own child is not immoral, and that's the important point.
I would say it's hard to argue that if one of them is my child, then in my eyes, trying to make the argument that they are equal is an uphill battle.
Yeah,
and so
that's a different thing. But we're using strict parameters here to try and kind of make a point. So
I mean, if I were in that situation and I truly judged the two children to be equal, even though one of them was mine, maybe I had a child. I mean, I happen to be very lucky and I have two incredible children. But let's say I had a child that for some reason I absolutely hated or whatever, enough so that it brought that person in my mind on par with a random stranger. In that case, it might be different, but to your original point, or I think the original intent of your question was, obviously I would take, in fact, I might even say it was Well, no, that now that I think about it, I wouldn't say that. I was going to say it might even be immoral to not take your own child,
Yeah,
but
I was actually gonna say that, Scott. That was
yeah,
before I was gonna be what I was gonna say. Like, if I would feel that if I didn't save my own child, that it would be unmoral to myself, because like morally as a parent, you're
right.
supposed to protect your child, right? So
It
wouldn't it
would
be
certainly
unmoral?
be hurting
Yeah,
yourself more. You'd be
yeah,
causing harm to yourself.
yeah.
Although you'd be compensated by the help that you're giving to the other parent. And so,
True.
um, it's tough to judge, but yeah, I don't think anybody could say that saving your. Have you found people? Do people say that it would be immoral to take your own child?
No, this is part of a. This is the first part
Oh,
of
okay,
a
all
bigger
right,
thought experiment. So I'm
gotcha.
glad you're discussing it so much already,
Uh-huh.
though.
Yeah,
So
real quick, I would say that I think what the thought experiment is doing in relation to the vegan conversation is to say that we we will always choose our own species, like our own children,
Hmm.
over other species.
there
And
is
is
more
that
to it,
immoral?
AJ. Hold your horses. There's more to it.
Okay, okay. All right, go on.
So now we're going to move on. Now we've kind of established that it's not immoral to save your own child.
Okay.
So there is a human animal. This is the next part of it. There is a human animal A and non-human animal B. Both are starving. You can kill the animal and save A yourself, or sacrifice yourself and save the animal B. What
Okay,
is
so
the
you are
right
the human animal. You are the
action?
human animal in
You
this.
are the human animal.
Mm.
Okay,
What
sorry.
is the
Yes.
right action? Because I would suggest that, again, as in the previous case, saving either is a virtue and not saving any is wrong.
Right.
So
Right.
choosing yourself is not wrong. It is at least as virtuous as choosing sacrificing yourself to the animal.
Right, and
The-
ultimately it will be a personal sort of. You will use your own personal opinion and experiences in whether what decision you make. But is it immoral? Yeah, no, I agree that neither one of would be immoral.
Right. And I think that, I mean, of course it's going to boil down to, how exactly are you defining virtue and how exactly are you
yeah.
defining vice and that kind of thing. But again, I think in general people wouldn't disagree with, well, it was do or die. It was you or them, and if it came down to that, I think most people would kill the animal. I'm sure that there are groups of people that, even some religious groups that would say, that they would let themselves die to feed the animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the final part of this
All
thought
right, here we go.
experiment.
This is the
This is the
gotcha.
important part. And this is something AJ touched upon earlier in the conversation as well. This has got implications for the vegan. So many vegans, and I've got to stress, not all, although AJ said earlier that most vegans would argue that if starving, they would eat an animal to survive.
Mm.
In which case, I would say, welcome to speciesism. So let's magnify that. What about farming animals when we're not starving? That's a totally different question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I would say not at all. Because even en masse, the answer is still the same. It's not immoral to kill an animal to eat. You might argue, and you might have a case, that refraining from killing animals is more moral than killing them for food. But you can't, if you agree with both of the previous steps in this argument, which most vegans, as AJ said earlier, and in my experience as well, do say, you cannot argue that it is immoral to kill animals for food. So by far the biggest ethical, this leads me to this, and the overall picture of this. By far the biggest ethical question is not what we farm, but how we farm. And in that, I've got very, very little disagreement with vegan considerations. But I think following the steps of this thought experiment, we can see that actually killing animals for food is not immoral. We've just walked through the process of why killing animals for food is not immoral.
So to play devil's advocate a little bit here,
Please
then,
do. That's why we're here.
yeah. So, so what? And I'm sure you've thought of this, and so I'm sure you have an answer prepared for this. But so the difference then is that in the second example, you didn't have another choice, right? And so if how are we going to make the jump to killing the animal to eat, even when you have other choices? And I know that any type of consumption, any type of farming, any type of food production is going to have
Some.
going to cause harm. But
Can-
let's
can you-
say that there was another example that we could show, and again, this is a thought experiment. Let's say that we could show that doing this other option would be less harmful than killing the animal to eat.
Can you tell me where in the previous options we didn't have a choice?
Yeah, we have a choice, but it's a choice between your own survival and the survival of the other animal. In the last option, if we had an option to not kill the animal, there is a branch on that tree that leads to us and the animal both living.
Yes, there is. And that is exactly why I put in that last option that we can argue that it's ethical to let me think of how I worded this. You can argue that refraining from killing animals is more moral than killing them for food.
Mm-hmm.
You can make that argument, but you can't make the argument that it is immoral to kill an animal to eat. And they're two different positions.
So are you saying that there's a threshold of morality then, that
Okay, yeah,
above
that's
this
what I was
point
gonna
is
say.
immoral, below this point is okay, kind of a thing?
Like
I-
depends on the situation.
So is it based on
Is that what you're
whether
saying?
you need to eat based on survival or based on just because?
This is the point of the thought experiment, is to get you to think. And bear in mind, this thought experiment is talking about veganism as a moral imperative. It's not talking about being vegan, just like as a general person.
Okay.
Mhm.
It's specifically about veganism as a moral imperative. Now, we've already agreed in the first two steps that speciesism is not a consideration in this, because we're happy to choose in the first step
Mhm.
our
Our own.
preference.
Yeah.
We're happy to kill an animal for food in the second step to feed ourselves. So speciesism itself is not a consideration in this. And that killing animals for food is not necessarily immoral. Now, if killing animals for food is not immoral, then the argument that veganism is a moral imperative does not hold.
Yeah, because if I say, like I said
Yeah.
earlier, if you have a tribe that relies on any kind of meat that they hunt or fish to survive, then I will be like, well, it's morally okay for them to eat meat. Then that means that I am giving up all of my argument for morality towards animals, and I am saying, you know what, it is no longer a moral argument. So
Yeah,
I
and
can't
this is,
use it for this situation, but not for that one.
and this is where we jump back to the earlier conversation we had
Yeah,
about the definition of veganism itself being special pleading.
We're all falling into Richard's trap. It's
I was
just
gonna
I
say
a
he
elaborate
took
know.
us in a
trap
big
Me
here.
circle.
too. You
So-
got
so-
me, Richard. I cannot disagree with you on that.
Don't
I
ask a
cannot.
philosopher onto your show.
How does so Richard, let me ask you this then. Let's go another step then. What if the other animal was another person?
Yeah, human and
I was
human.
I was gonna go
Yeah,
there
I was
too.
gonna ask that
Okay.
too.
Absolutely.
That
That's another step in the question.
So can
That-
we say then that killing that person is okay, or at least is not
If it was for survival,
immoral,
it would be okay, but
right?
would it be
Yeah,
unmoral?
for
Immoral?
I
Yeah.
I think it will be because we use that for instances of self defense. Like if a man were to be trying to take advantage of me physically, and I were to kill them, that would not be considered immoral,
Yeah.
right? And if, let's say, I was stranded in an island with another human being, and we were both about to starve, and we cannot find any source of food, and we have not been able to hunt any animals, and all we have is each other, it will probably be survival of the strongest.
And a quick shout out to the chat who are talking about George Carlin's bit on cannibalism. So I just wanted to recognize that. Big thumbs up from me.
yeah, there's just one. I know I've kind of dominated this, and I kind of suspected I might do at the beginning. There is another kind of thing I want to raise before we go, if people don't mind me doing that. And
Yeah,
if
sure.
there's any direction you guys want to take it in, feel free, because I don't want to railroad it as much as I have done.
Richard, we all just love listening to you. So go for it. Let's
Yeah.
hear it.
Bullshit, man, Scott.
No, I am not bullshitting you at all. I love talking to you, Richard. So please do.
So this is kind of unfair to Chase a little bit, because he's not here. He's in the chat at least, so that's one thing. But I'm
You
going
can
to
answer, so yeah.
Yeah, I want to. Chase has pointed to two studies in, interactions I've had with him in the past. One of them, unfortunately, I can't find. So, Chase, if you can find that study, if you recognize it and you can find it, please do post it, or send the link to AJ so she can post it. I'm going to start with the one I can't remember first, because there's less details. I've actually got the other one to hand, so I can actually point out the details in it.
Okay.
I'm regularly pointed out. Chase regularly pointed us out, and I'm only mentioning you, Chase. Please forgive me, because you are in the chat and you are here. If you weren't here, I wouldn't mention you by name. Just point out, by the way, that I love Chase. I've had great conversations with him in the past, and it does bring a great deal to the table. So this is not an attack on Chase. It really isn't. I just want to make him aware of that, because I know he's here. So it does quote a study which is by Oxford University, I think, in which he claims that veganism, correctly, he claims this is a healthy diet. And while I have no qualms with this, what he does neglect to say when he's kind of doing his spiel on that is that the study finds that the healthiest kind of diet is one that includes fish and restricts red meat, but doesn't cut it out altogether, and includes white meat. And I am being a little bit tenuous because, as I said, I can't find the study. I've tried looking for it before I came on tonight, and I couldn't find the specific study. I just remember those details from having read it. There is another one, which Chase has pointed out before. And this one, I think, and I'm not going to say deliberately, it could be a mistake. I think Chase misrepresented this study to show that veganism was more favorable than it actually is. And this study is called, and again, Chase, if you've got this link, please feel free to share it. The global and regional costs of healthy and sustainable dietary patterns, which is a modeling study by Mark Springman, Michael A. Clark, Michael Rayner, Peter Scarborough, and Patrick Webb. It was published in the Lancet Volume 5, Issue 11 in 2021. And I've heard Chase claim many times that this study shows that vegan and vegetarian diets are the cheapest option in high-income countries. And this is very much like Scott was talking about earlier when he was talking about the Ray Comfort liar thing. It is very much a semantic thing. So that's a very, very sensationalist way of presenting the study's findings. And they specifically show, and I'm going to directly quote this from the paper, alternative dietary patterns ranged from being 1 to 14% more expensive. High veg, pescatarian, high green pescatarian, flexitarian, and high veg vegan. To 6 to 11% less expensive, which were the vegetarian, high green vegetarian, high green and vegan, on average compared with current diets, with large variables across income regions in high income and middle income countries. All dietary patterns, except for the high veg pescatarian diets, were less expensive, with great cost reductions for the high grain vegetarian and vegan diets, which cost reductions of 22 to 34% across the two regions, followed by the high veg vegetarian and vegan diets, 17 to 27%, the flexitarian diets, 12 to 14%, and the high grain pescatarian diets, 1 to 3% in each region. In lower middle income and low income countries, all dietary patterns were more expensive, 18 to 45% in a similar order. So I want to break down that, the actual things from the study against this claim. So high veg vegan diets were 1 to 14% more expensive, the same as the analysed diets that contained meat and fish compared to current diets. Vegetarian, high grain vegetarian, high grain and vegan were 6 to 11% less expensive. So some vegan diets are less expensive. Some vegan diets are more expensive. And I think it's interesting to note that his stance, as I understand it, on vegetarianism is not a favourable one. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chase. And yet high grain vegetarian diets fall into the same category as high grain vegan diets. So why, Chase, aren't you quoting this study in favour of vegetarian diets? It seems that whole old thing I was talking about earlier of special pleading might be creeping back in a little bit. But it actually continues to state that the results are highly varied across different regions. So let's remember the specific claim. And here we once again need to kind of remember that vegan speciality of specific wording.
Yeah.
Vegan and vegetarian diets, cheapest option in high income areas. Yes, that is what the study shows, but let's look at the wider results. All dietary patterns, except for the high veg pescatarian diets, were less expensive. So yes, the vegetarian and vegan diets were the cheapest option, but the diet that included meat was also cheaper than current diets in this region. So what have we got with this claim? We've got what we talked about right at the beginning of this conversation, the fallacy of relative privation. Meat diets are included here, but the vegan diet is more cheap. And so the argument, as it appears to be being made, seems to be that because it is cheaper, it is better. But that's not what the study is trying to demonstrate. And this is really, really important. And it's why it's so important to learn how to read the methodology of reading studies properly. It's creating models of sustainable diets and examining their cost. Nowhere does it conclude that the cheapest is the best. The meat diet is also cheaper than current diets. The parameter being measured, that is, in the case of the study, a successful model. So why isn't this being highlighted? Why not, as a vegan, highlight that switching to sustainable diets would be cheaper?
Yeah.
That's what the study's trying to show. And the only response I can find for this is special pleading. It doesn't fit the message. So we'll ignore that sustainable diets, except pescatarian, in higher income countries would be cheaper to specifically point out that vegan diet is the cheapest.
Hmm.
So that's a
Interesting.
long-worded way of saying that the study isn't about what Chase thinks it's about,
Right.
and Chase is cherry-picking the results to push an agenda. And in lower,
I can see.
middle-income, low-income countries, all dietary patterns, by the way, were more expensive. And that seems to be another point that's been left out of this kind of pushing this, is not pointed that out at all in any of the times I've seen him speak on this.
So was this a study for a specific region? Because you spoke about different areas. Was this like in a specific country, or is it like worldwide?
It was worldwide. It was a worldwide study.
Okay.
So
Ah,
it talked about different regions in worldwide, and the actual study it was specifically about sustainable diets compared to kind of the normal diets that are undertaken in those countries. So it was talking about, when it was talking about meat eating diets,
yeah.
what it was talking about, it was a reduction in red meat. It was based around the health benefits of diets and sustainable diets.
Yeah, and
So
I think it would also be important to point out whether it was like a analysis of data, or was it that what they were actually calculating the cost of what somebody might
yeah,
eat? Was it
yeah, it
there's
was a
just so
mixture
many
of all.
factors.
I'll send you the study,
Okay.
and you can like kind of review it yourself. But it was
Be-
it was a widespread study. It was based on kind of a projection of what a healthy diet, a sustainable healthy diet would be
Mhm.
compared to what is currently being eaten by these different groups.
Okay, because I can think of, for example, like so many different factors that would affect the results of this in completely different countries. If I look at the type of foods that my parents eat in Switzerland, which is a whole of lot of whole healthy vegetables and like very plain foods, not a whole lot of processed food, versus what the average American eats in the US, and it's just such a completely different type of diet that how can you even compare the costs? And of course, if you switch from the standard American diet of like cereal and I don't know cold cuts and cheap bread, and you switch to whole foods and eating high grains and lots of vegetables and lots of fresh fruits and produce, yeah, it's gonna be more expensive. It's gonna be more expensive for sure. Like
Yeah,
I noticed that for myself, I was eating a lot of processed foods, but they were kind of like more expensive because they were gluten free. And so when I switched to whole foods plant based diet, my costs reduced a little bit because I wasn't buying all of that higher, more expensive box packaged food. So
yeah.
it's like so much
I've got to
different. I
stress.
don't.
I've got to stress here that this is. I'm not making an argument that vegan food is more expensive than is being suggested. That's not what I'm saying.
Oh, but I'm trying
The
to say that what Chase is saying is it just can't you just can't use that
You
argument
can't
for
pick that
yeah.
from just
At least not
that
in
study.
isolation.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm
yeah,
agreeing with you, Richard,
Yeah.
on this one. I'm completely agreeing with you. Your
that
assessment
that
of the
that was
study
my
of
sole
the
point. That this study is, and like I say, I love Chase to bits. I've nothing against Chase as a
thing.
human being. I'm just pointing out that whether by design or otherwise, and I want to say otherwise because I think the guy's a great guy and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. This study has been cherry picked to show certain information and it doesn't quite match what the study actually says. And that's my only point on it. I'm not saying that vegan food isn't cheaper. I'm not saying that it can't be cheaper. That's not any argument I'm making. I'm just saying when we're quoting studies to make a point, we need to be
Yeah.
very, very careful to do so accurately. I look through a lot of scientific papers. I read through a lot of them. Some of them I don't understand. I sent one Scott just the other week, and I didn't understand a word of it. And I sent it to Scott because I knew Scott would have more of an insight into it than me. I do read a lot in my own field of study, and I see a lot of mistakes made in them, and then the analysis of them as well. And all I'm pointing out here is that we've got to be very careful when pointing out stuff to try and make a point especially a high charged point as this one is, that we are not cherry picking the information. And that appears to me to be what has occurred in this study. When Chase has made this claim about this study, I feel that that data has been misrepresented.
Not only cherry picking, but also the conclusion is not the actual conclusion that's being discussed. It's kind of like a deflection or a related conclusion.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, you know, the least expensive meal might not be the best meal for you.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
the study is what the study is. You know.
Yeah, and there was just so much variation across all of the world that you cannot just say, oh, vegan diet is always cheaper. Like, it's just not, it's not reasonable to say that. I gotta take a quick bio break. Can I leave you guys talking among yourselves? Find something to talk about.
Just before you go, I have talked a hell of a lot. I do feel like I've railroaded this. I'm going to shut up for a while. I'm going to let you guys speak. And, you know, if you want my opinion, I will jump in. But I want to give you guys the opportunity to have some of this conversation. And
all right, maybe Joseph or Scott will have something to say. And I will be right back.
Yeah, I'm curious to Joseph. I'm curious to hear what you'd have to add about after what Richard just said.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like I agree with what AJ was saying. I mean, there's so many in terms of the study about the information that it was having in there. I mean, there's so many different variances that can go into play, such as like you know, wages in certain parts of the world, cost of living, and so forth. So I mean, that's gonna fluctuate. So it's kind of hard to say if that's, I mean, if the data is actually fully accurate in terms of that. But I do agree that when you're making an argument that you should fully, or if you're using a study to actually make an argument that you should fully, you know, portray the study correctly, definitely keep it on track.
Well, as Richard was saying, many studies can be kind of convoluted, especially if the authors have an agenda as well.
Yeah, behind it.
Not only they don't always, you know, it's good practice, of course, to represent your raw data, to give your methodology, to give, you know, to give a full description, how you gathered your sample, et cetera, et cetera. But those aren't always highlighted, and sometimes they're kind of tucked into the back, or sometimes they're hidden behind jargon. One could argue even specifically sometimes with the intention of obscuring it from public consumption there, you know, so somebody who was interested, who wanted to read it, it could be misleading, right?
Yeah, it can misconstrue it, correct.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, one of the things that I tell my statistics students is that one of the best reasons to learn statistics is so that you can't be fooled as easily by other people who do know how to use statistics. And so, you know, some very often biases that may be known to the author or may not be known to the author. You know, it's not always intentional. Of course, sometimes it is intentional, but not necessarily always. And so they can, the way that you present an answer can make a big difference. And so I think that all of that needs to be taken into consideration when reading some of this. And especially if somebody's passionate about the subject, like many vegans and many non-vegans are very passionate about their position, it can be tempting and maybe even unavoidable to slant the results that you read in your way. I mean, there's, you know, we have experiences all the time where two people can be looking at exactly the same thing. Maybe we're watching a sporting event or something, and one person says, no, that was clearly out of bounds. The other one says, no, it was obviously in bounds. I mean, we've actually have experiments where we know we physically perceive things differently based off of our preconceptions. And so I guess this is just yet another way that we can't just treat it as a cut and dry issue, because it's so clearly not. And I don't know, maybe what I just said was itself a cut and dry statement, but you know, that's kind of the situation that we're in here. you can't ignore the nuance in a situation where, in a way, it's nothing but nuance.
Yeah, and I mean
Yeah.
that we've shown that throughout this whole conversation. There's just so many aspects to consider. You can't just say most of these questions don't really have a yes or no answer. It
Right.
seems
Right. Yeah,
so.
exactly.
Yeah, it's from your like from an individual perspective and experience, basically, kind of as well. So like what you consider to be moral, towards your own, I guess, your own your own life, to
Mhm.
like what your actions do. I mean, when we were talking earlier about, you would save your child, because I feel that when we have a connection to a living species or a living thing, then you're more likely not to want to, like, if I have a cow and I'm it's my pet cow, I'm probably not going to want to kill that cow because I have a connection and a friendship with him. So I'm not going to want to kill him and eat him. But if it's a cow that I have, it's not my friend, he's not my pet, I have a
Right.
disconnection there. It doesn't bother me to think that I'm going to eat him and have a nice steak.
One thing that's often overlooked is that I think a lot of farmers, and my brother-in-law until recently was a farm which was inherited from my wife's granddad. Um, a lot of farmers do love their animals. They really, really do. And there are systems in place now where you can get kind of ethical milking systems where the cows freely walk in and attach themselves to the milking system, which attaches to the udders by
Right.
use of clever radars and computers and all this modern stuff that I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah, I've seen
understand
those.
because
They
I'm an
can
old
even
man.
identify, like with GPS chips on the cow, the machine knows what cow is coming in and when the last time they were milked and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and ethical farmers who use these systems have actually found that the cows will willingly come in and be milked. They will willingly come in and be milked. Now,
But what is the system though? Do they have some type of reward to where they were sort of
no, it's just stalls.
trained?
It's literally just stalls they can freely walk into.
Yeah, so they
Uh,
they would know what's going to happen when they walk in
yeah,
there if
they
they've
know
done it
what's going to
before.
happen.
Yeah.
There's no kind of, it's not like a Pavlov's dog situation. They just walk in and they get milked and then they walk out and so uh, these things exist and these things are increasing. And I think one thing we've touched upon, all of us, I think, in this conversation, but I think is probably the most important part of this conversation, is that the way we currently farm overall is shit.
Yeah.
It's wrong and it's abusive to the animal. And my stance on this is that we would do far better working together, both vegans and non-vegans, in advocating for ethical farming rather than being at each other's throats.
Right.
That's my stance on that's the kind of, after all this 2.5 hours of conversation, that
We
is my whole stance on this thing. I
Can't we
think,
all just get
get
along?
along.
Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
yeah.
Well, for me, it has different approaches. I don't think there's a one size fits all solution. I don't think that everybody going vegan is going to be a reasonable solution. But like you said, working together would be a good way. And helping both, helping vegans understand that their way of communicating with non vegans is not working, and helping non vegans be more open to listening to vegans and plant-based people um, when they come up with a better communication style. I guess you
Yeah.
could
Yeah.
say.
Well, you
So
could
it
use
will
that
take both.
against like any type of disagreement though. Like
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was Richard that said it earlier or Scott, when someone mentioned it when we were saying, when you're aggressive towards trying to get someone, coming at someone aggressive with
Oh yeah, it was
your
Scott.
point of view, they're not going to receive that very well, and you're normally
Right.
not going to be able to get to change their mind, or to make progress to get them to maybe move in the direction of some of your beliefs or views that you're trying to portray. So yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
definitely.
What I would like to see from non-vegans is, do people can people use meat as a food source? Okay, if you want to, sure, go. Like, I'm not gonna stop you, but I wish people were a little bit more open to non-animal protein sources. They're not that scary. They're not that bad. They're not that terrible. Like, the amount of meat that somebody actually will require to eat to sustain their life is not as much as we actually eat. Like, we eat so much more meat that we actually require. So that would be
Yeah.
another, reduction of meat
Reduction, yeah,
consumption,
yeah.
I
which will help
absolutely
with the
agree.
farming.
I think it's exceptionally important to point out that were we to have sustainable ethical farms, and this is really, really important, the price of meat would go up. The consumption of meat would go down. Both
Yeah.
of those things are good things.
Right. Yeah.
Consumption of meat, less consumption of meat, especially red meats, would reduce health problems. There's no doubt about that. It's in the
Yeah,
data, it's in the
Oh, yeah.
studies.
yeah,
There's no doubt about it. It would reduce environmental impacts. It would increase welfare, the welfare of the animals being farmed. All of these things are good things, and they're all things we should be on the same page about. And I think, I'm a huge advocate for that. As I said right at the top of this show, one of the biggest things I will argue is that I want vegans to call talk heathen. I want to have these ethical conversations, and I will fight tooth and nail against those people who say you're supposed to be talking about God. What you're talking about veganism for? It's a platform for ethical conversations,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
that
think
includes
there's very many
veganisms.
parallels too. I mean, it's not even it's not a completely unrelated thing, at least in a process kind of perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think if not, from the perspective of animal harm, using morality to excuse veganism because of the harm that we cause animals, that we could maybe use ethics to make the decision about what you just mentioned, which are like our own species, even if this is speciesist, um, to improve the health quality, the environmental harms that we are doing, climate change, the animal farming style that we use, and this will reduce human harm to other humans. And from that perspective, I could see it being maybe not moral, maybe not a moral dilemma, but like an ethical issue. I mean, the way that I got into the whole vegan conversation, because before that I was one of those that when you hear the word vegan, I will just roll my eyes and be like,
Mm.
oh, one of those. Like I hadn't tried vegan. No, we did try vegan diet a long time ago,
yeah.
but it
We
was,
did for like half a year. I think you did. You made
yeah,
it like a year. I made it like half a year.
Mm.
but it was like strictly health related. And so we just had our baby, and so it was kind of like a time where it wasn't something that was at the forefront of my thinking. But so around 2020 with COVID, I had a lot of spare time. I was gardening, I was growing my own vegetables and looking up lots of videos on how to do that because I didn't have experience with it. And so, the algorithm, it just takes you down some vegetarian stuff, the vegan stuff, plant-based stuff. And I started seeing a lot of stuff about, I have type 1 diabetes, and about insulin resistance and how a plant-based diet could help with that. And I was like, okay, obviously I'm a type 1. It's not going to be like cure my diabetes or anything, but if it improves my numbers, uh, because I was having lots of highs and lows, if it helps me stabilize my numbers, then great. So I gave it a try. It was not vegan diet. All right, I was still eating things like honey, and sometimes I will eat I don't know, other like things that you don't really think about that may not be fully vegan. But it was mostly like a whole foods plant based, lots of grains, lots of the whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, vegetables, fruits, and all of that stuff. Um, I had struggled with so many chronic issues, joint pain, high cholesterol, other hormone levels that were pretty high. One of them is called IGF-1, which is in combination with some other levels that were also high for myself, were indicative of potentially being something that could be something that will lead to cancer, or at least it was understood in that way by my doctors, but there was like no visible cancer yet. It was something that they were like, your levels are definitely off there. And so I started this diet. I dove into it like head first, 100% for a whole month. I did not touch a single uh, of the main animal products that we would think of, cheese, milk, butter, meat, fish, anything like that. And we repeated those tests a month later. And even though I had struggled with high cholesterol for like 15 years before that, my levels completely changed within a month.
Hmm.
And I was fully shocked at that. My pain levels, that's a whole story within itself. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had a nerve stimulator implant on my spine for the pain because I could barely walk. I would sometimes use a crutch on one side. I've used a cane. I've used a wheelchair whenever it will affect both of my legs. When there was like a long distance walking, I will have to use the wheelchair as well. Within a month, my pain was so low that eventually, over the next year, we took out the nerve stimulator implant. We stopped muscle relaxers. I stopped using ketamine, which was really freaking strong. That's what Elon Musk was on. Uh, so
You had to go and bring it up. You had to go. All right, I'm out
I'm
of
just
here.
saying, like I'm just saying, like that was how strong my pain was that they put me. Like my doctor prescribed all of these medications that were fucking up my mind in all kinds of ways. Uh, I was on opiates for about 10 years, and I currently, right now, I am on nothing, absolutely nothing for the
Yeah,
pain.
and I witnessed all this firsthand. I
Yeah,
mean,
Hmm.
it was crazy, like the difference that the diet
and
caused.
Hmm.
I'm
I mean,
telling you, like before this, I spent 15 years having surgeries, injections, extremely painful injections with needles this big on my spine. Uh, it was just torturous. And so the way that this diet helped my health is so beneficial, and with it is why I always feel so strongly about it. But at the same time, I avoid telling people to do it because of their health. Because even though I've seen the studies, even though I've read things that show benefits, I'm like, look, I'm not an expert. I can't tell you that it's going to help every single person. And so I try not to do what we just talk about with cherry picking and saying, hey, all vegan diets are cheap, or hey, all vegan diets are going to heal your
gonna cure
conditions.
cure everything. Yeah.
It worked for me, and this is my personal experience with it. And I just wanted to let you guys know this is why I feel so strongly about it and how it started. Like the animal harm part came way later.
Hmm.
So yeah, so that's my story about that. Yeah.
We'll allow it.
I'm interested, Scott. I know Joseph's tried vegan diets. I've tried various vegetarian stroke vegan diets over the years. Uh, I'm interested in whether you have actually tried vegan diets in any point in your life.
Yeah, like I don't think I ever went fully vegan. I guess I would say vegetarian because I was still eating cheese. I don't drink milk, so I never. We were using, I think, almond milk if we were cooking. So I think the only thing I was probably eating was cheese, probably, that would have been considered
Yeah,
not
I
vegan,
think we
right?
were using like the plant-based cheeses at the time too.
It was really hard for me because
Yeah.
I'm a very picky eater to begin with. So it like really narrowed down like the different types of food, what I could eat. It was hard, but I was up for the challenge. I wanted to see if it did make me feel any better. For me, it wasn't for any health reasons. Well, I do have high cholesterol. I have fought with that, and it did lower them, my numbers, but
Hmm.
still, even after going through all that and seeing that it can be beneficial to me, I still go back to eating meat. Um, for some reason, I love the taste. And again, I guess I have that disconnect to, like I talked about earlier, where I have a mental block in my mind where even though I know all the horrible things that happen with animals, that's like blocked out in my mind, and it doesn't bother me when I'm enjoying a steak.
That's a human thing right
Yeah.
there. That's a normal compartmentalization happens, and people wonder how can people be religious when they're a doctor or something like that. It's just, or if they're a physicist or whatever, somebody who knows the real lowdown on some of these, on some of, people just compartmentalize, and that's to be expected. If you want to be a human being,
Yeah.
you have to do that.
And I guess it is kind of being selfish, but again, humans do have that selfish, that naturally can be selfish. So I mean, we're always going to do some things that are enjoyable, even though we know maybe they do cause harm to some others.
Right.
We kind of pick and choose, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, like we
Is that
drink
morally
and
wrong? I
smoke
mean,
and
I don't know.
yeah, like so many people know that smoking or drinking can cause you harm, and we still do it. Like I
Yeah.
have blacked out from drinking and stuff, and I still, enjoy drinking to this
Right.
Yeah,
day.
Right.
yeah, you might get blackout drunk one weekend and have the worst hangover the next day, and you're like, I'm never gonna, drink tequila again. And then like the next week, you're taking shots of tequila. So I mean,
Yes.
it's
Yeah, but I think what you were just asking, how what you were just saying, not asking, about this compartmentalization, is it definitely does apply to religion as well, and it's
Sure.
the one of the reasons why indoctrination happens is pushed so early on in life
Right.
with
Right.
kids,
Before you have those defenses
because
set up.
you build that base, and yeah, like you have to build that base of disconnect. And if you tell a child that all of these things are possible through this magical being, then the older they get and the more they get exposed to that, the harder they're going to believe it, and the harder it's going to be for them to deconvert from that. And I think that meat eating is something that people have to deconvert from. You can't just like give it
Right.
out from one day to the next. Like it may happen, it does happen, and I think Chase was one that was saying that it happens for him very quickly. Well, first he was vegetarian, but then when he saw something specific, it was just like a night and
yeah, like
overnight
a trigger, like
conversion. Yeah.
Mhm.
something like switched.
But I think those are very extreme cases, and the majority of people do have to deconvert from that ideology that meat comes from an animal
Well,
or
yeah, I think
even
it's that disconnect that we've created in society where we if you kids, you go to a store, kids, they see a chicken nugget, we have like pictures of dinosaurs,
yeah, even though it says
dinosaur shaped chicken
chicken,
nuggets,
they're not
you
like
know
thinking chicken.
yeah, to make them just think it's just food, and there's no connection. They have that disconnect of where that product came from. They don't see the slaughtering of the chicken. They don't see this factory farming that we're talking about that's so horrible. We have that disconnect in society from a young age, like you were just talking about, how we don't how kids don't see that. Me as an adult, if I had to slaughter my own meat, go out and shoot a deer and skin it, which I've done and seen done before when I was in my younger. I mean, it's a gruesome process. If I had to do that to enjoy eating meat, I probably
Mm.
wouldn't eat meat because I wouldn't want to have to do that myself.
Yeah, I think I don't know what Scott's situation. Well, all of your situations with your children. I'm very kind of fortunate that my children have had the opportunity to go and stay on a farm
Mhm.
and not witness the slaughter process, because I don't know how it works in the US, but in Britain that doesn't happen on the farms. They get shipped off and done elsewhere.
Right.
But they've been in. There is no disconnect between the fact that this pig here that I am feeding this day is going to end up as bacon on my plate or sausages on my plate. They are fully aware of that,
Right.
fully aware of it, and I'm glad of that. I'm glad
And
of that.
I agree. That should be. I mean, kids should know that that's the case. You know that's
Yeah, and I think
that can
that
be a food source.
a lot of the kids that go through that, like they will make their own decision of what. Like my sister, when growing up, we did live in a farm. We didn't often experience slaughter of the animals. Like it was done somewhere else. Like Richard mentioned, but I think what happened was my brother killed a chicken and they cut his head off, and then the chicken was still flailing around without the head. And my sister saw that. She was a little bit younger than myself. I think I laughed at it at the time because I was a kid and it seemed funny. She cried and then she stopped eating meat.
Hmm.
So I think that seeing that sometimes can help kids make that decision or make that distinction at least. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if we should like necessarily expose them to a headless chicken, but let them know how the process goes and
Yeah, I
where
think
their
it's an
food is coming
important.
from.
I think
Mhm.
it's an important principle. I think before we wrap, I think I just want to address if I'm going to be a bit cheeky, AJ, and then jump on your show to advertise Talk Heathen. I've noticed Top
No, go
G
ahead.
in the comments, and I believe Top G might be a theist. So I'm going to use this opportunity to
Mm.
Oh,
say, Top G,
Give us a
give Talk
call.
Heathen a call tomorrow at 1 p.m. Central on Talk Heathen on 151299919242, or you can use your computer at
right.
tiny.cc/call th. It's all up here. I do it that often. And again, just before we close, I do want to give a big shout out to Chase, who has been in the chat and not able to respond to a lot of the things I think many of us have mentioned him tonight. And I do want to give a shout out and just say thank you for being the person you are and having the conversations you've had with me and with others over the years. And I appreciate I've been calling you out quite a lot tonight by name, and you haven't been able to respond. And I just want to acknowledge you for that, and just say thank you for bearing with us while we do that. And if you want to respond, you are more than welcome to. That anytime.
Yeah, here he posted a comment, and I agree with this. This is what we were talking about earlier, reducing the harm of humans, that humans experience. Uh, and like you were saying, a more ethical farming could help somewhat with that. They will still have to be killed, and I'm sure there will still be somewhat of a harm to the people that are doing that killing. So I don't know exactly how to go about that. But if there was anything that humans are is creative and resourceful, so we can figure that out. But yeah, no, Chase, I just want to remind them that after our last conversation, after the last show, it was the little push that I needed to go back into my fully plant based vegan diet, and I have. So thank you, Chase. I
Hmm.
appreciate that. And even if we disagree on many things, because you know, Richard made very, very good arguments today, uh, that I still support veganism. I just think that the conversation needs to change. The style of communication needs to change from both sides, from both vegans and non-vegans, and that will be a much better way that we can eventually come to better solutions, I suppose.
Yeah, no, Chase is a great person. When he was on the show, I had a great time conversating with him as well. And I mean, when I see someone so avid or so into their cause, I mean, it's a good thing. Like AJ said earlier, like we can't we can't each as individuals support like all these causes. Like everyone has their own causes that they're fighting for, and he's very into what he's into. So I mean, I give him props for that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That is the one that he's fighting the hardest for, and I definitely give him props for that. Yeah, I know he's like super outspoken. He's always out there on the streets. And if let me find his channel real quick because he deserves some a shout out. So I'm gonna put the link to his channel in the chat in a second and find it. So I mean, it's just like his username, Chase Avier. If you look that up, he's also on Facebook. Yeah. So he always posts videos about like the conversations that he has on the street or the protests that they do and such things. So we do appreciate you in the community, Chase. And as far as top G, I did not realize that there were tiers. So I put the phone number for Talk Hidden. Hopefully, he will be on. He might call tomorrow. Who
All
knows?
right. We got
Right.
is tomorrow the British Invasion Day? Is that what's happening tomorrow?
It is.
Yeah.
Oh my
All
god, I'm
right. All
so
right.
excited.
That'll be
Yeah,
cool.
the fantastic Emma Thorne will be joining us.
Uh,
Yeah,
Right.
Emma is brilliant. If you have not seen Emma, go and check out Emma's channel. She responds to theists and various bad arguments. She's an internet personality, unlike me, who's just some fucking random like boring philosophy guy who just happens to pluck the way through the internet badly.
yeah, she's there is some really crazy stuff that she posts that people are sharing.
Mm.
My goodness, but her commentary is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I
Not
agree.
gonna lie, I was familiar with Emma before I was familiar with Richard.
Yeah, most people are. That's not a bad thing to say. It's a thing I take
uh,
fully on the chin. Emma's great. I've worked with Emma before. I've known her for a couple of years.
okay.
She's great.
Have you done any shows with her before?
I've produced a show of Talk Heathen that she was on before, and I
Okay.
have worked with her on the non-profits a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought I did see her on some of the like very long time ago episodes of the non-profits. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably before she became super popular, busy lady. Yeah, I would love to have her on my channel at sometime. At some point, maybe I'll like sneak in a conversation tomorrow, and
There
be
you
like,
go. There you go.
That's how you do it.
AJ knows how to work it.
right. Hey, you gotta climb your way up
You do.
somehow, even if it's like clawing like this. I will do it. So, speaking of clawing my way up, I am so excited because we weren't supposed to go to NanoCon originally. We didn't think we were
Right.
gonna make it, but then I was like, I'm gonna make it happen because there's just so many amazing people that are gonna be there, like Seth Andrews and well, of course, Secular Rarity is up there. I know Sidney Davis Jr. I don't think D is coming from Stacy's mom podcast, but Stacy is going, and her future husband Drew Beckius is going. April Joy. She is actually a Christian, but she's very much against Christian nationalism.
Mm.
So she's going to be one of the speakers there, talking on that specific
All
topic.
right. Respect there. Respect.
Yeah, I also got Chris from the Damn Network. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Chris Mallard.
Oh
He's-
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. We
Chris,
had him
yeah.
on nonprofits not too long ago.
Oh yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Okay, so I convinced the organizers to have Chris on one of the panels, so he's gonna be there too.
Oh, nice. That's
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but then Sydney asked me to be on her panel, and I was like, "Are you sure you're talking about me?" So yeah, so I'm like stoked about
A
that.
little
It's
humble
gonna be.
brag from AJ there. A little
I
humble
have
brag. All right.
to.
Yep.
She
That's
deserves
my
it. She works
Yep.
hard.
win.
Definitely, AJ. You are a workhorse. That's for sure.
Yeah, and
That's
just
like
point out
my
that I've been
highlight
doing
for the
this shit
year.
for 35 years and I haven't been invited. So
Richard.
Come on over. We'll put you somewhere. Well, I think it's because they will have to pay your plane fare and stay. So, but if you're ever on this side, we will stuff you on any open spots. All right.
yeah.
Goodness. All right. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
Let me see real quick. Shows coming up. I have two more shows coming up next month, July. We're not in July yet. No, we're not. Okay. I don't
Almost.
know what day
Almost
it
there.
is.
We're
I don't
almost
know what
there.
day it is. Yeah. So on the 7th, I'm gonna have Steve Gickadis. I think I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. He's the author of Humanism from the Heart. So he's promoting his new book, and he's gonna be on right here talking about
Awesome.
building bridges beyond belief.
There we go.
Then the following week, on July 16th, I'm gonna have Tim Whittaker from the New Evangelicals, and he's actually um, the woman that I just mentioned, April A. Joy. That's gonna be at NanoCon. They do a show together, so they both used to be very conservative evangelicals, and they deconstructed from that into sort of a more inclusive faith. I will call it. I'm not exactly sure if they go to any specific church, which is kind of like the conversation that we're going to have, like how does his faith uh, measure up against other faiths and stuff like that. I'm not sure like exactly how the conversation is going to go, but I'm hoping it will remain very respectful because I really enjoy their content. It's something that I think every Christian in America needs to be aware of, and it's the harms that Christian nationalism is
Yeah, for
doing,
sure.
and to be able to everybody, both theists and non-theists, that need to push for the separation of church and state because nobody benefits from that,
Right.
from those two coming together. So, all right. So we've been on this for 3 hours, guys.
Wow, three
Boy,
hours, huh? Okay.
hard marathon evening for
Yeah,
us
yeah.
here. What
it's
is it like?
probably
It's got to be like 2 a.m. for Richard. It's
Yeah,
got to
it's
be
1
like 2
a.m. here.
a.m.
It's
next
1.
week or something.
Yeah, thanks for staying up with us, Richard. We appreciate that.
It's always a pleasure, and Scott's a good friend of mine, and I love working with Scott at any opportunity I get, and
Back
I
at
always
you,
love
man.
coming on this show and talking to you, Joseph and AJ. It's a pleasure. It really, really is a pleasure. So thank you for having me. I do
No,
appreciate it.
thanks for both of you for coming
Yeah,
on.
no,
Always,
I appreciate it as
always,
well. I look
it
forward
was-
to seeing both of you in Austin too, right? You guys coming?
Oh
Oh,
yeah, the back
yeah.
cruise. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah?
We'll be
All
there.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
We'll get
coming
Richard
to.
there one of these years.
I
We
know
can FaceTime him. He can be like
Oh,
virtual.
that'll work. That'll work. Yeah.
we'll have to do like a specific fundraiser to have Richard come over here. We'll start it now and then save enough for the
Right. Yeah.
2026.
It'll take us 7
Something
years.
like
but,
that. Yeah. Wheel
$1
me
per
over.
show, maybe.
He's got a lot of things on his rider though that we have to like have all the right color M&Ms and there's right color, there's right flavor.
He's gonna have a whole
tequila,
list.
and he has to.
Goodness. There might be a pile of books that might be traveling with him.
There'll
Yeah.
definitely be a pile of books traveling with me, without a doubt.
That's
Without
what
a
it
doubt.
is.
Well,
It's
I had
just
a blast. I had a blast. So thank you all for having me on. This was so much fun. I'm glad you allowed. I kind of invited myself on actually. I heard you all talking about being on. I was like, oh, I want in on that. So I appreciate you.
Oh yeah,
indulging
no,
me on
Scott,
that.
you need to come on again. I mean,
I'd be
definitely,
happy
it's-
to.
Yeah.
I'd be happy
yeah,
to
definitely.
anytime.
yeah, maybe next time we'll talk about math.
All right. I'm ready. I'm your
I
guy.
suck at
I'm
I
your
suck
guy.
at math. Don't school me too
Scott
hard.
doesn't know this. I'm going to sneak this in before we go in. One of the chapters of the book I'm writing is all about kind of how we do maths and misinterpret math, and
All right.
and Scott is going to be proofreading that for me. I've not told him this yet.
I was just about to
This is
say, let me know when
revelation.
you're ready with it, and I'll be your beta
I
tester there. I'd be happy
throw
to.
it my
That'd be
way.
awesome. I'd love that.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I will be sending it you.
Okay, sounds good.
I look forward to reading that, even though math is just goes over my
It
head.
just takes the right. It just takes the right teacher. It just takes the right teacher. You
There we
probably
go.
do more math than you realize.
That's true. That's true. Like when we started homeschooling, I had to take I had to get my kid to take a few months off of any even mention of math because he was like traumatized by math. Okay,
Mm.
from like the school system. And so we took that time off, and then I approached it in a very different way, and I was like, it's fine. It's not like torturers anymore, and we are both learning some. I'm learning what I didn't learn when I was in school, you know?
All right, that's the best
That's
way to
great.
do it, right?
That's great.
I
Yeah.
learn new stuff every day. So if you want to know the best way to learn something, teach it. That's the best way to learn it, I
Hey,
think.
that is true.
I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. All right. So we're going to close this up. Anybody else have any finishing thoughts?
Watch Talk Heathen and call Talk Heathen if you believe in God or the supernatural. I'm going to plug it so the fucking cows
Hey,
come
all right,
home.
keep
So
it up. Somebody
Might as
shut him off.
well, yeah, might as well plug in the non-profits. Comes on 3 times a week, and I've been on it before. You know, Richard has been on it, Scott has been on it, and then AXP comes on at 4:30 p.m. Central. So call either one of those shows. Okay, the non-profits doesn't have a call in, but Talk Heathen, AXP, feel free to call. Talk about
Definitely. Call
supernatural
Talk
beliefs.
Heathen though. Try them first.
Yeah, that's the testing, the
that's
beta
the
test.
Yeah.
The hierarchy of calling is
Exactly.
truth
Right. Yeah.
wanted, talk hidden, AXP. There you go. If you want to test for calling talk hidden, first call truth wanted on Fridays. Well, that was yesterday, so never mind. But next, uh, call talk hidden tomorrow. I put the phone number out there.
Oh,
And be kind to people, be kind to each other, be kind to other species wherever you can, and keep thinking, never stop why did I almost say never
just
stop
stop believing.
believing?
That's what I thought you were gonna say. I started journey like went off in my head.
Oh my god, I
I'm
gotta
glad
shut
you
this
said
down.
that. I was just about to start humming it.
Just a city boy
I know.
from South Detroit.
Oh man,
There we go.
I think she's delirious from the 3 hours, so we're
That
good.
could be. That could
Yeah.
be.
I think so. I meant to say never stop learning. What was hot, and I just said about like continuing to learn. Never stop learning. Oh, never stop believing that you can learn.
Right.
There we go. There we go.
All right, and we'll see you next time, everybody. Thank you for hanging out in the chat. And Chase, much love. Appreciate you and appreciate everybody else that was chatting out there. We'll see you next time.
Peace and
Don't
love.
forget to like and subscribe.